The warp does not forgive mistakes, and reality does not mourn the lost. When the dimensional tear opened above the imperial world of Vardis Prime, it was not accompanied by the usual howling of demons or the laughter of dark gods. Instead, there was only a flash of impossible blue light, the color of a summer sky that no one on Vardis had seen in 3 generations, and the screaming descent of something that should not exist. Captain Steve Rogers had been fighting Hydra's latest reality weapon when the fabric of space simply tore open beneath him. One moment, he was in the savage land, shield raised against cosmic energy that threatened to unmake continents. The next, he was falling through layers of existence that burned cold and hot simultaneously. Through a place where geometry was optional and screaming faces pressed against membranes of tortured space. The warp tried to claim him, tried to corrupt him, tried to show him every possible future where he failed and everyone he loved died screaming. Steve Rogers had seen worse. He'd watched Bucky fall. He'd woken up 70 years too late to save the world he knew. He'd held Tony Stark and felt nothing but regret. The warp's visions were horrifying, but horror was something Captain America had learned to endure and keep moving forward anyway. When he impacted Vardis Prime's surface, the crater was small. His shield had absorbed most of the kinetic energy, spreading it across vibranium's impossible molecular structure. But the shockwave was enough to crack the already damaged ferrocrete for 30 meters in every direction. Steve rolled to his feet automatically, shield up, assessing tactical situation through decades of combat instinct. What he saw made his blood run cold. The sky was the color of infected wounds, sickly yellow-green shot through with purple lightning that moved wrong, that bent at angles his eyes refused to properly process. The air stank of burning promethium, rotting flesh, and something sweet that made his enhanced metabolism want to purge his stomach. In the city, what remained of it was a nightmare of Gothic architecture gone mad. Spires adorned with screaming faces, streets running with liquids that might have been water, but moved with too much purpose. American, the voice came from behind rubble that had once been some kind of cathedral. A man emerged, or what was left of one, gaunt, starving, wearing tattered flak armor that bore a symbol Steve didn't recognize, a stylized skull with wings. The man's eyes were sunken but burned with desperate hope. No, not American, but the star. You wear a star? Steve's hand tightened on his shield. I'm Captain America. I'm here to help. What happened to this city? The man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Help? You want to help? He gestured wildly at the burning ruins. The ruinous powers happened. Chaos happened. The governor turned traitor 6 months ago, opened the gates to the warp, and now we're fighting for our souls. Not our lives, those are already forfeit. Our souls. I don't understand. Of course you don't. The man's voice cracked. You're clean. I can see it somehow. You're not touched by the warp, not corrupted, not broken. Where did you come from? What are you? Before Steve could answer, reality bent sideways and something appeared in the street behind the soldier. It was humanoid in the way that mannequins are humanoid, technically the right shape, but wrong in every detail that mattered. Its skin was flayed open to reveal muscle that pulsed with its own light, and where its face should have been was a fanged maw that split its head in half vertically. Demon! The soldier screamed, and he raised a rifle that looked like someone had welded a flashlight to a Kalashnikov and prayed to whatever gods listened. The weapon fired a last beam. Steve's enhanced perception caught the coherent light, but the demon simply laughed and the beam bent around it. Steve didn't hesitate. He'd fought gods, aliens, and interdimensional horrors. This thing, whatever it was just another monster that needed stopping. His shield left his hand with the perfected throw that came from a lifetime of practice, spinning through the air with physics-defying precision. The vibranium struck the demon's center mass, and suddenly the creature was screaming. Not laughing, screaming. The shield had hurt it in a way the last weapon couldn't, and Steve was already moving, catching the shield on its return arc and driving forward with it extended. He slammed into the demon like a battering ram, and his enhanced strength combined with vibranium's unique properties drove the creature backwards into a collapsed wall. Stay down, Steve growled. and he brought the shield's edge down on where he estimated the creature's head connected to its body. There was resistance, then a wet crunch. And the demon dissolved into purple smoke that stank of sulfur and roses. The soldier stared at him, jaw hanging open. You killed it with your hands. You killed a demon with your bare hands and a shield. Is that unusual? Steve asked, already scanning for more threats. Unusual? The man's laugh was edging toward hysteria. Demons are manifestations of the warp itself. They're unkillable unless you have sanctified weapons, psychic powers, or the Emperor's blessing. You just beat one to death with a piece of metal. Vibranium, Steve corrected absently. It's not exactly normal metal. Look, I need a sit rep. Situation report. How many civilians are left? What's the enemy strength? Where are your forces concentrated? The soldier blinked. Sit. Rep? You talk like a soldier, but your armor... He gestured at Steve's uniform, which had seen better days but still bore the star prominently. That's not Imperial Guard, not Space Marines, not Sisters of Battle. What chapter are you from? What world? I'm from Earth, Steve said, and right now that doesn't matter. What matters is saving these people and stopping whatever's happening here. Earth, the soldier repeated. Terra. You're from Holy Terra itself? If Terra is what you call Earth, then yes. Steve decided to run with it. Now answer my question, soldier. That's an order. Something in Steve's voice, the command presence that had led the Howling Commandos in the Avengers, made the man snap to attention despite everything. Trooper Marcus Venn, 47th Vardis PDF, sir. Civilian population down to maybe 10,000, hiding in the Underhive. Enemy strength unknown. Cultist number in the hundreds of thousands. Demon manifestations increasing daily. Our forces, he swallowed hard. 1,200 PDF troopers, no commissars left alive. No astropathic contact with the sector fleet. We're alone, sir. We've been alone for 6 months. Steve processed the numbers, and they painted a grim picture. 1,200 soldiers against hundreds of thousands of enemies, protecting 10,000 civilians. No reinforcements, no resupply, no hope. The kind of situation where retreat was the only logical option. But Captain America had never been logical about retreat. Then we'd better get to work, Steve said, and he started walking toward where Marcus indicated the PDF holdout was located. Because if there are 10,000 people who need protecting, that's 10,000 people worth fighting for. I don't care what powers these cultists think they have. I don't care about demons or chaos or whatever nightmare you're facing. We're going to hold the line, we're going to protect those civilians, and we're going to win. That's what soldiers do. Marcus stared at the man with the star-spangled shield walking into hell itself with his head held high, and for the first time in 6 months, Trooper Marcus Venn felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Hope. Behind them, in the warp-twisted sky, something vast and terrible noticed the incorruptible soul that had entered its playground. And in command bunkers across what remained of Vardis Prime, PDF officers received confused reports of a stranger in blue fighting demons with nothing but a shield and impossible courage. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. The legend of the Starbearer had begun, and the Imperium would soon learn that sometimes hope was the most dangerous weapon of all. The PDF command bunker was a masterwork of Gothic brutalism buried 300 meters beneath Vardis Prime's Underhive. Reinforced ferrocrete walls 2 meters thick, covered in prayers and purity seals that Steve couldn't read, but recognized as desperate faith made physical. The bunker's main strategic chamber stank of unwashed bodies, recycled air, and fear that had fermented into fatalistic determination. Steve entered flanked by Marcus, and every conversation stopped. 12 officers and twice as many enlisted personnel turned to stare at the man in the tattered blue uniform carrying an impossible shield, and Steve recognized their expressions immediately. He'd seen them on soldiers' faces throughout every war he'd fought: exhaustion, desperation, and the hollow-eyed recognition of people who'd stopped believing in tomorrow. Who in the Emperor's name are you? The speaker was a woman who'd clearly been beautiful once, before malnutrition and stress had carved her face down to essentials. Her uniform bore markings Steve didn't recognize, but her bearings screamed command authority. "Marcus, report. Why did you bring an unknown combatant into our secured position?" "Colonel Vestra," Marcus snapped to attention. He says he's from Terra. He killed a demon. With his hands, I saw it." The colonel's expression didn't change. "Marcus, you're exhausted. Demon manifestations can create hallucinations. We've discussed." "I'm real," Steve interrupted, stepping forward and extending his hand. "Captain Steve Rogers, I know this is going to sound impossible, but I'm not from your Terra. I'm from a different Earth entirely. And I got pulled here through some kind of dimensional portal. But that doesn't matter right now. What matters is I'm a soldier. I'm here, and I want to help." Colonel Vestra didn't take his hand. Instead, she drew a pistol. A massive hand cannon that looked capable of punching holes through engine blocks, and aimed it at Steve's chest. Around the room, other weapons appeared, all pointed at him. Lasso rifles, stubbers, even what looked like a flamethrower. "Nobody just appears on a chaos-occupied world by accident," Vestra said coldly. "You're either a spy sent by the traitor governor to infiltrate our position, or you're something worse, a demon wearing human skin. Either way, you're not getting near our civilians." Steve kept his hands visible, shield lowered non-threateningly. He'd been in similar situations before. Soviets who thought he was a capitalist trick, Hydra infiltrators testing him, even other Avengers when they first met. Trust had to be earned, especially from people who'd been betrayed. "I understand your caution," he said carefully. "If I were in your position, I'd be suspicious too. But I killed a demon in front of Marcus. If I were one of them, why would I attack my own kind?" "Chaos is deception," another officer growled, a scarred man missing his left arm below the elbow. "The ruinous powers play games within games. For all we know, you killed a lesser demon to gain our trust before opening a warp portal in our bunker." "Then test me," Steve proposed. "Whatever methods you use to detect these demons, use them on me. I'll submit to any examination that doesn't involve torture. I'm here to help, and I'll prove it however you need." Vestra's eyes narrowed. "Any examination? You understand what you're offering. The only reliable test for chaos corruption is psychic interrogation, and our last sanctioned psyker died holding back a tide of warp spawn 3 weeks ago. The next most reliable test is painful." "I heal fast," Steve replied. "Do what you need to do." The colonel holstered her pistol and gestured to a side chamber. "Bring him, and someone fetch Medici Solon with his blessed silver." The examination room was barely large enough for Steve, Colonel Vestra, and Medici Solon, a hunched man whose augmetic eye whirred constantly as it focused on Steve. The Medici held a knife that gleamed with what Steve's enhanced senses told him was actual silver, covered in engravings that might have been religious text. "This is blessed silver from the Cathedral of St. Marguerite," Solon explained in a voice that suggested he'd delivered this speech many times. "Silver touched by faith repels the warp. If you're corrupted, this will burn you. If you're a demon in human form, this will banish you. If you're clean," he shrugged, "it will hurt like any knife wound." "Do it," Steve said, extending his arm. Solon pressed the blade against Steve's forearm and drew it across in a shallow cut. Blood welled up. Normal, red, human blood. And Steve's jaw tightened against the pain, but he didn't flinch. The silver burned slightly, but no more than any wound would. No screaming, no dissolving, no demon revelation. "Emperor's mercy," Solon breathed. "He's clean, completely clean. I can see it now. His soul, it's like looking at polished steel. No corruption, no taint, no whisper of the warp. How is that possible after 6 months on this damn world?" Colonel Vestra leaned closer, studying Steve's face. "Who are you really? Not your name, your purpose. Why are you here?" "I'm a soldier who fights for people who can't fight for themselves," Steve replied simply. "In my world, I fought against tyranny and oppression. Here I'm seeing something worse. Literal evil trying to destroy everything. So I'm going to do what I always do. Stand between innocent people and whatever's trying to hurt them for as long as I can stand. You talk about evil, Vestra said quietly, but you don't understand what we're facing. This isn't a war over territory or resources or political ideology. This is a war for souls. Every person the cultists kill, every demon that manifests, every moment of despair, it feeds the ruinous powers. The enemy doesn't want to conquer Vardis. They want to corrupt it, transform it into a demon world where reality itself bends to chaos. Then we don't let them, Steve said. Simple as that. Simple. The colonel's laugh was bitter. We have 1,200 exhausted soldiers, no air support, no orbital assets, no reinforcements coming. The sector fleet won't risk warp travel to a chaos-occupied world. We're not even sure they know we're still fighting. The Imperium writes off planets like Vardis every day. We're already dead. We're just too stubborn to admit it. Steve met her eyes. Colonel, I spent 70 years frozen in ice while everyone I knew and loved aged and died without me. I woke up in a world I didn't recognize, fighting enemies I didn't understand, using technology that seemed like magic. And I kept fighting anyway, because that's what you do when people need help. You don't stop, you don't give up, you don't let impossibility dictate what's possible. You asked who I am? I'm the man who doesn't know how to surrender. Silence filled the small room. Then Vestra holstered her pistol completely. Captain Rogers, I'm going to tell you something that would get me executed if the commissariat still existed here. The Imperium of Man is not what you think it is. We're not heroes. We're not saviors. We're a fascist theocracy that sacrifices billions to save trillions, where innovation is heresy and compassion is weakness. The God Emperor we worship has been a corpse on a golden throne for 10,000 years, kept barely alive by the deaths of 1,000 psychers every day. This is the Imperium you're offering to fight for. Steve absorbed this, and something cold settled in his gut. He'd fought alongside governments he didn't agree with before. The Soviet Union against the Nazis, SHIELD. Despite its secrets, but this was different. This was a system that seemed built on the exact oppression he'd spent his life fighting against. I'm not fighting for the Imperium, Steve said carefully. I'm fighting for those 10,000 civilians in the Underhive who didn't choose any of this. I'm fighting for your soldiers who are defending their homes. Whatever your government is, whatever it's done, that's a problem for after we save these people. First rule of triage, stop the bleeding, then worry about the underlying disease. Vestra studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're either the most naive man I've ever met, or the bravest, possibly both. She gestured for him to follow her back to the strategic chamber. All right, Captain America, you want to help? Then help us plan. Because in approximately 6 hours, the cultists are launching their largest assault yet. They're trying to break through to the civilian shelter, and if they succeed, those 10,000 souls become either corpses or worse, sacrifices in whatever dark ritual their traitor governor is planning. Steve followed her to a massive table covered in maps that looked hand-drawn, showing the Underhive's labyrinthine structure. The tactical situation was worse than he'd thought. The PDF held 3 choke points, but the cultists had overwhelming numbers and something Vestra called demonic support that could manifest anywhere reality were thin. Your standard defense is strong, Steve observed, studying the positions. But you're spread too thin. 3 choke points mean you can't concentrate force or mutual support. If any one point breaks, the others are flanked. We don't have enough troops to hold a single point against their numbers, the one-armed officer, Captain Wren, objected. 3 points lets us fall back if one is overrun. Fall back to where? Steve asked. Your backs are against the civilian shelter. There is no fallback position. You're thinking about this like you expect to lose. Start thinking about how to win. Win? Reen laughed bitterly. Captain, we're fighting demons with flashlights. We don't have the blessed weapons. The psychic support or the Space Marine intervention needed to actually win against chaos. We're buying time until everyone dies. That's victory here. Steve straightened. No, victory is protecting those civilians until real help arrives. And in the meantime, we fight smart. Concentrate your forces at the strongest choke point. Here. He pointed to a junction that offered overlapping fields of fire. Use the other 2 points as early warning and fallback ambush positions. Make them pay for every meter, funnel them into killing grounds, and most importantly, he met every officer's eyes in turn. Never ever let them think they've won. The moment you accept defeat, you've already lost. I learned that from a friend who was always too stubborn to quit, even when he should have. Colonel Vestra looked at the revised tactical positions, then at her officers. It's risky. If we concentrate and they break through, there's no second line. Then we don't let them break through, Steve said. Ma'am, I've fought in World War II. I've fought aliens in New York. I've fought robots trying to extinct humanity. Every time someone told me the odds were impossible. Every time I won anyway. Not because I'm special, but because when you fight for something that matters, impossible becomes just another word for takes longer. The officers exchanged glances. Finally, Vestra nodded. Emperor, forgive me. I'm taking tactical advice from a man who appeared out of thin air and thinks he can inspire underfed soldiers to beat literal demons with optimism. She managed a tight smile. But stranger things have saved us. Captain Rogers, you have 6 hours to prepare our defense. If you're as good as you claim, prove it. If not, she shrugged, we were dead anyway. Steve nodded and turned to the maps, his tactical mind already working through firing lanes, fallback positions, and contingencies. Around him, officers began reorganizing their forces, and Steve felt something he always felt before battle. Grim certainty that he was going to do everything possible to save every life he could. On the surface, Chaos cultists prepared their assault, confident that the last defenders of Vardis Prime would break. They had demons, they had numbers, they had the blessings of the dark gods themselves. But they didn't have Captain America, and in 6 hours they were going to learn why that mattered. The choke point Colonel Vestra had designated Junction Primus was a nightmare of industrial architecture, a convergence of 3 underhive transit tunnels, each 40 meters wide and lined with rusted pipes that wept contaminated water. The ceiling was 20 meters up, supported by ferrocrete pillars that had cracked over centuries of neglect. It was, strategically speaking, a perfect killing ground for defenders with limited forces. Steve stood at the junction center, shield on his arm, watching PDF troopers establish firing positions under Captain Wren's direction. The soldiers moved with the exhausted efficiency of people who'd done this too many times. Sandbag emplacements going up with practiced speed, heavy stubbers being positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. Your tactical revision bought us better angles, Wren admitted grudgingly, his remaining hand sketching fields of fire on a data slate. But tactics only matter if the soldiers can execute. Half my troopers haven't slept in 2 days. They're running on stims in desperation. Then we give them something to fight for beyond survival, Steve replied. He'd been watching the soldiers, really watching them, and he recognized the signs. These weren't beaten people. They were exhausted people, and there was a difference. Beaten people had given up. Exhausted people just needed a reason to find one more reserve of strength. Steve walked to the center of the junction and raised his voice. PDF troopers, gather round. I need 5 minutes of your time. The soldiers looked to their officers, who nodded permission. Slowly, suspicious, and confused, they assembled. 1,200 faces, gaunt and scarred, wearing armor that had been patched so many times it was more repair than original. But their weapons were clean, their positions were solid, and their eyes, tired as they were, still held something that mattered. They were still fighting. My name is Captain Steve Rogers, he began, and his voice carried the command presence that had rallied soldiers across a dozen wars. I know you don't know me. I know I appeared out of nowhere wearing strange armor and carrying a weird shield. But here's what you need to know. I'm a soldier, same as you, and I've been in impossible situations before. This isn't impossible, it's suicide, someone muttered from the back. Then I've been in suicidal situations, Steve continued without missing a beat. I've fought when outnumbered 10 to 1. I've fought when my friends were dying around me and victory seemed like a fantasy. I've fought when people told me to surrender because continuing would only make the losses worse. He met eyes across the crowd. And I'm still here. You know why? Because when you fight for something that matters, when you stand between innocent people and evil, something happens. You become more than just a soldier following orders. You become a symbol. You become proof that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and fighting anyway. Easy for you to say, a woman with burn scars covering half her face called out. You killed a demon with your bare hands. We barely hurt them with everything we've got. I killed one demon, Steve corrected. One. You've held this position for 6 months. 6 months. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? Most people would have broken in 6 days. But you're still here, still fighting, still protecting those civilians in the shelter. That's not weakness. That's strength beyond anything I've seen. He held up his shield. This shield has been with me through every battle I've fought. It's saved my life more times than I can count. But you know what? It's just metal. Special metal, sure, but metal nonetheless. What makes it effective isn't the shield. It's the man carrying it. It's the belief that no matter how hard you get hit, you stand back up. You find a way. You endure. The enemy has demons, a young trooper said, voice cracking. How do we endure against things that can't die? The same way you've been enduring, Steve replied, together. I've seen your positions. Overlapping fields of fire, mutual support, soldiers covering each other's weaknesses. That's not just good tactics, that's brotherhood. That's the thing demons can't understand and can never corrupt. People who fight not just for themselves, but for each other. The cultists out there, they serve dark powers that promise strength but deliver slavery. You serve something better. You serve each other, and those civilians counting on you. He walked through the crowd, making eye contact with as many as he could. In 6 hours, they're going to attack this junction with everything they have. They think you're beaten. They think you'll break. They think that because you're tired and outnumbered and afraid, you'll give up. Steve's voice hardened. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to prove them wrong. We're going to stand at this junction, and we're going to show them what happens when you underestimate people who have something worth dying for. We're going to make them pay for every centimeter. We're going to hold this line. And if we can't, someone asked quietly, then we hold it anyway, Steve said simply, because that's what soldiers do. That's what heroes do. And every single one of you, he pointed across the assembled faces, every single one of you is a hero. You've already proven it by lasting this long. Silence filled the junction. Then from somewhere in the back, someone started a slow clap. Another joined, then another. Within seconds, 1,200 soldiers were applauding, not with enthusiasm, but with grim acknowledgement. Steve had given them something they desperately needed. Recognition that their suffering mattered, that their endurance counted for something. Colonel Vestra approached as the crowd dispersed back to their positions. That was either brilliant or incredibly dangerous, she said quietly. You gave them hope. In the Imperium, hope is often the first step toward heresy. In my experience, Steve replied, hope is the last thing that keeps people human. Without it, what's the point of fighting? Duty, Vestra said immediately. In death, duty ends. That's what we teach. Then your teachers were wrong, Steve said bluntly. Duty without hope is just slavery with better branding. These soldiers aren't fighting because they're ordered to. They're fighting because they believe their fight matters. Never underestimate what people can do when they believe. Before Vestra could respond, a siren wailed, a horrible, warbling sound that made Steve's teeth ache. Around the junction, soldiers snapped to combat positions with the speed of veteran troops, and Wren's voice barked over voxcasters. Contacts inbound, multiple signatures, fast-moving. They're early. They're attacking 4 hours ahead of schedule. They sensed something, Vestra hissed. The warp reacts to shifts in morale. Your speech, it changed something, and they felt it. Emperor's teeth. They're coming now. Steve ran to the main defensive line, shield ready. Through the leftmost tunnel, he could hear them coming. Thousands of footsteps moving in chaotic rhythm, voices raised in chants that hurt to hear. Words in languages that shouldn't exist but somehow communicated pure malice. The first cultists appeared at the tunnel mouth, and Steve got his first good look at what chaos corruption did to humans. They had been people once. Now they were something else. Bodies twisted by mutation, skin covered in suppurating sores, limbs elongated or multiplied, faces split into screaming maws or fused together into flesh mosaics. Some wore the tattered remains of PDF uniforms, suggesting they'd been defenders once. Others were naked, their corruption having outgrown clothing entirely. All of them radiated wrongness that made Steve's enhanced senses scream warnings. "First rank, fire!" Captain Wren roared. A wall of las beams lit up the tunnel, concentrated light that should have dropped dozens. Some cultists fell, burned through, but others simply absorbed the hits and kept coming. Behind them, something larger moved, a demon like the one Steve had killed earlier, but bigger, its flayed muscle body covered in Baroque armor made of screaming faces. "Second rank, fire! Heavy weapons, prioritize the demon." Heavy stubbers opened up, solid rounds that chewed through cultists like a thresher through wheat. But there were so many. They filled the tunnel like a living flood, climbing over their own dead, and the demon behind them laughed with a sound like grinding bones. Steve made a decision. He couldn't let that demon reach the PDF line. These soldiers were brave, but they weren't equipped to fight something that shrugged off their heaviest weapons, which meant he had to go to it. "Captain Rogers, what are you?" Vestra started to say, but Steve was already moving. He vaulted over the sandbag emplacements and charged directly into the cultist horde. His shield led the way, slamming into corrupted bodies with precisely controlled force, enough to incapacitate without killing if possible. Because even twisted by chaos, these had been people once. But when cultists attacked him with blades made of crystallized screams or limbs mutated into weapons, Steve hit harder. A cultist whose face had become a lamprey's mouth lunged at him. Steve caught it with his shield's edge, a strike that would have killed a normal human, but only stunned this creature, then followed with a kick that sent it flying backwards into its allies. Another came from the side, arms ending in bone scythe. Steve ducked under the slash, came up inside its guard, and delivered an elbow strike to what approximated a jaw. He fought like a man possessed, except he was fighting against possession itself, against corruption made manifest, against the physical embodiment of evil. And with every cultist he dropped, with every impossible strike of his impossible shield, the PDF soldiers watching felt something they'd almost forgotten. Inspiration. "Emperor's blood," a trooper whispered. "He's actually doing it. He's fighting them hand to hand and winning." "All units, advance fire," Colonel Vestra commanded, seeing opportunity. "Support the captain. Pour fire into that tunnel while he disrupts their formation." The combined assault was devastating. Steve created chaos in the cultist ranks, breaking their momentum, and the concentrated PDF fire exploited the confusion. Cultists fell in droves, and even the demon hesitated, its limited intelligence recognizing something it hadn't expected. Resistance that actually hurt. Steve reached the demon, shield held defensively. Up close, the creature was even more horrifying. Its flayed skin showed organs that pulsed with their own light, and its breath smelled like burning hair and rotted flowers. But Steve had fought worse. Thanos had been worse. Ultron had been worse. This thing was just another monster that needed stopping. "Come on," Steve said quietly. "Let's dance." The demon struck with speed that belied its bulk, claws that could rend ceramite armor. Steve blocked with his shield, and vibranium did what vibranium did. It absorbed the kinetic energy completely, not even ringing from the impact. The demon shrieked frustration and struck again, faster. A combination of attacks that would have overwhelmed normal reflexes. Steve Rogers didn't have normal reflexes. Enhanced by the super soldier serum, his combat speed operated on a level that made him seem prescient. He didn't react to attacks. He anticipated them, reading the demon's muscle movements, weight shifts, and attack patterns with the skill of someone who'd fought gods. He blocked, parried, and when he saw an opening, he struck back. His shield's edge caught the demon's knee joint, and something cracked. The creature stumbled, off balance for just a moment. Steve didn't waste it. He drove forward, shield held like a battering ram, and struck the demon's center mass with every ounce of enhanced strength he possessed. The impact drove the demon backwards 15 meters, its body plowing through cultists like a cannonball. It tried to rise, tried to regenerate the damage, but Steve was already there, shield raised high, and he brought it down on the demon's skull with prejudice. The creature dissolved into purple smoke, its death scream echoing through the underhive. And in that moment, as the cultist horde reeled from their leader's destruction, Steve Rogers turned to face them, shield held ready, blood running from a dozen minor cuts, and said the words that would become legend on Vardis Prime. "I can do this all day." The cultists broke. They simply broke and ran, fleeing back into the tunnels they'd come from, their chaos-corrupted minds unable to process the impossibility of what they'd just witnessed. Behind Steve, the PDF line erupted in cheers, raw, ragged, uncontrolled celebration from soldiers who'd just seen one man turn the tide of a battle that should have been unwinnable. Steve walked back to the defensive line, breathing hard but grinning. Colonel Vestra met him at the sandbags, her expression caught between awe and horror. "That was the most insane thing I've ever witnessed," she said. "You charged a chaos horde alone. That's not tactics, that's suicide." "It's what needed to be done," Steve replied. "Besides, I wasn't alone. I had 1,200 soldiers backing me up with covering fire. That's called teamwork, Colonel." Vestra shook her head slowly. "The men are calling you the Star Bearer. They're saying the Emperor sent you. Captain Rogers, do you understand what you've started? You've given these soldiers something dangerous. You've given them belief that they can win." "Good," Steve said simply, "because we're going to need that belief when the real attack comes. This was just a probing assault. The main force is still out there." "How do you know?" Steve gestured at the cultist bodies littering the tunnel. "Because I've fought wars before, and I know what a serious assault looks like. This was a test. They wanted to see if we'd break easily. We didn't. So next time, they'll come with everything they have." He met Vestra's eyes. "Which means we have maybe 2 hours to prepare for the fight of our J Continulives?" "Then we'd better get ready," Vestra said. And for the first time since the Chaos occupation began, there was steel in her voice instead of fatalistic acceptance. "Star-bearer or not, you've reminded us how to fight. Time to see if we've remembered how to win." Across Vardis Prime, in a corrupted governor's palace that had become a shrine to the ruinous powers, something ancient and evil took notice of the incorruptible soul that had killed its servant. And in the warp itself, 4 dark gods leaned closer to watch, intrigued by the man who bore a star and refused to kneel. The siege of Junction Primus was about to become legend. The 2 hours between assaults felt like 2 minutes. Steve moved through the PDF positions, adjusting firing lanes, reinforcing weak points, and doing something that seemed to unsettle the soldiers more than the approaching chaos horde. He learned their names. "Trooper Vesk," Steve said, kneeling beside a young woman who couldn't have been more than 19, her hands shaking as she cleaned her lace gun for the 3rd time. "That's good weapon discipline. You keep that rifle clean, it'll keep you alive." "Yes, sir," Vesk mumbled, not meeting his eyes. "But it won't kill demons. Last beams just make them angry." "Then we'll make them very angry together," Steve replied. "What's your specialty?" "Every soldier has something they're best at. Marksman training, sir. Before the corruption, I was training for scout sniper." She gestured at her standard issue laser gun with bitter irony. "Fat lot of good that does against enemies who don't die from headshots." Steve considered this. Demons might not die from headshots, but cultists still have human anatomy under all that corruption. And even demons have weak points, joints, sensory organs, anything that disrupts their physical cohesion. You don't need to kill them permanently, just slow them down enough for concentrated fire to finish the job. Think you can do that? Vesk looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. "You really think we can win this, don't you? It's not just talk." "I think we can win this specific battle," Steve said honestly. "The war? That's above my pay grade. But this fight, at this junction, protecting those civilians? Yeah, we can win that. And sometimes one battle is enough." He moved on, repeating the process with dozens of soldiers, learning names, identifying strengths, building not just tactical cohesion, but something more important: unit identity. The PDF had been fighting as desperate survivors. Steve was transforming them into a team. Captain Wren watched from the command position, his scarred face thoughtful. "You're turning them into believers," he said quietly as Steve returned to review the defensive positions. "In the Imperium, that's dangerous. Belief belongs to the Emperor alone." "In my experience," Steve replied, "belief in yourself and your comrades makes you a better soldier than belief in distant authority." "No offense to your Emperor. Plenty taken, but I'm too tired to care." Wren gestured at the tactical display with his remaining hand. The scouts report massive troop concentrations in all 3 approach tunnels. This time, they're not probing, they're committing everything. Estimated force strength exceeds 20,000 cultists, plus demon support that our sensors can't properly quantify because warp entities don't register consistently. 20,000 versus 1,200, Steve calculated aloud. Roughly 17 to 1 odds. I've worked with worse. When? Battle of New York, alien invasion force, infinite reinforcements through a portal, 6 defenders. Steve's expression hardened with memory. We held until we could close the portal. The odds don't matter if the mission is clear. The mission here is survive long enough for evacuation. That's never coming, Green said bitterly. There is no portal to close, no cavalry riding to the rescue. The Imperium has written off Vardis Prime. We're ghosts fighting ghosts. Before Steve could respond, alarms shrieked again, but this time different. The sound was deeper, more resonant, and it made Steve's enhanced hearing register pain. Around the junction, soldiers grabbed their weapons, faces pale with recognition of something worse than standard assault warnings. "That's the warp proximity alarm," Vestra's voice crackled over Voxcasters. Reality integrity failing across all 3 approach vectors. Multiple major demon manifestations confirmed. They're not just attacking, they're tearing reality open. Steve ran to the primary viewing station, a jury-rigged surveillance system that showed grainy pic feeds from the approach tunnels. What he saw made his blood run cold, not from fear, but from raw tactical horror. The cultist horde was massive, filling the tunnels like a living tide. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was what was forming above them. Tears in space itself, wounds in reality leaking purple-black energy that congealed into shapes. Demons were manifesting in numbers that dwarfed the probe attack. Dozens of the flayed muscle creatures, plus larger entities that defied visual processing. Things with too many limbs and geometries that hurt to perceive. And at the center of the largest rift, something vast was beginning to push through. Even through the low-quality feed, Steve could sense its power. This wasn't a lesser demon or even a major threat. This was something the cultists had been building toward for 6 months of ritual and sacrifice. "Is that," Rain's voice broke slightly, "Emperor's Mercy, that's a greater demon, a keeper of secrets. They've been preparing to summon a champion of Slanesh this entire time, and we just gave them the emotional resonance they needed." "What does that mean?" Steve demanded. "It means your speech about hope and courage created a spike of positive emotion on a chaos-corrupted world," Vestra explained, arriving at the command station. "Slanesh feeds on sensation, any sensation, despair, joy, pain, pleasure. Your inspiring words created a feast of emotional energy that the cultists used to anchor their summoning ritual. You gave them exactly what they needed." Steve felt the words like a physical blow. He tried to help, tried to inspire, and instead he'd armed the enemy. "How do we stop it?" "We don't," Vestra said flatly. "A greater demon requires space marines, sisters of battle, or a very powerful sanctioned psyker to banish. We have lace guns and stubbornness. The moment that thing fully manifests, everyone in Junction Primus dies. The only question is whether we evacuate the civilians first or die trying to buy them time." "Third option," Steve said, his tactical mind racing through impossibilities. "We kill it before it fully manifests. How long does the summoning take?" "Minutes maybe, but then we have minutes." Steve turned to Wren. "That rift, it's creating a weak point in the enemy formation. All those cultists are focused on protecting the summoning. That means they're static, defending instead of attacking. If we hit them hard and fast, we might be able to disrupt the ritual." "With what forces?" Rain demanded. "We need everyone at the defensive line or we'll be overrun from the other approaches." Not everyone, Steve said. Just me. The command station fell silent. Then multiple voices erupted at once. That's insane. Suicide doesn't help anyone. You'll never even reach the rift. Steve raised his hand, and somehow, the authority in that gesture silenced everyone. Listen to me. I've fought my way through worse odds with less backup. But more importantly, I'm the only one here who's actually killed demons without blessed weapons or psychic powers. Whatever that greater demon is, it's still made of something physical enough to hurt. And if I can hurt it, I can stop it. Even if you reach it, even if you disrupt the summoning, Vestra argued, you'll be trapped behind enemy lines with 20,000 cultists between you and safety. Captain Rogers, this is martyrdom, not tactics. Martyrdom is dying uselessly, Steve corrected. This is calculated risk. If that greater demon manifests, everyone dies anyway. If I can stop it, then you have a chance to hold the junction against regular cultists and lesser demons. Those odds are better than guaranteed extinction. He started checking his shield straps, preparing for combat. Besides, I've been behind enemy lines before. It's where I do my best work. Marcus Venn pushed through the crowd of officers, the trooper who'd first met Steve looking simultaneously terrified and determined. Sir, if you're not going alone. I know those tunnels. I can guide you through maintenance passages the cultists haven't fully secured. It's still suicide, but at least it'll be tactical suicide. Marcus? No, Vestra started. Ma'am, with respect, I've been dead inside for 6 months, Marcus interrupted. Watching everyone I know get corrupted or killed, holding a line that meant nothing because we were all going to die anyway. Then this man appears and reminds me what we're actually fighting for. If he's going to try something insane, I want to be part of it. Steve studied the young trooper, saw the determination that replaced his earlier despair, and recognized something essential. This wasn't about tactics anymore. This was about symbol. If Steve went alone, he was a hero making a sacrifice. If a PDF trooper volunteered to join him, it became something more. Proof that the PDF itself hadn't given up, that Vardis Prime's defenders were still in the fight. All right, Trooper Venn, Steve said. You're with me. Anyone else? 5 more hands went up immediately, then 10, then 20. Within seconds, over 100 soldiers were volunteering for a mission that was objectively suicide, and Steve felt his chest tighten with emotion he couldn't quite name. These people, exhausted, underfed, fighting an unwinnable war, were still willing to risk everything. Absolutely not, Vestra said firmly. I need those soldiers holding the line. Captain Rogers, you can take Marcus because he's right about knowing the passages. But that's it. Everyone else stays on defensive positions. It was a compromise Steve could work with. He nodded acceptance and turned to Marcus. How long to reach the rift through these maintenance passages? 8 minutes if we run and don't encounter resistance. 12 if we have to fight through cultist patrols. Marcus was already pulling up tunnel schematics on a data slate. There's a ventilation shaft that comes out directly above the main summoning chamber. We'll be dropping into the middle of their ritual, surrounded by hundreds of cultists and whatever's coming through that rift. Then we'd better be fast, Steve said. He addressed the command staff. Hold this junction no matter what. If we succeed, you'll know. The greater demon won't manifest. If we fail, he met Vestra's eyes. Evacuate the civilians and make the cultists pay for every meter. Either way, make our sacrifice count. Emperor guide you, Starbearer, Vestra said quietly, and Steve realized she wasn't being religious. She was being genuinely afraid for him, which somehow meant more. Steve and Marcus moved to the junction's eastern maintenance access, a narrow corridor that barely accommodated Steve's shoulders. Behind them, the PDF prepared for the assault they knew was coming. Ahead, through kilometers of twisted underhive passages, a greater demon was clawing its way into reality. You really think we can stop this? Marcus asked as they began jogging through the darkness, their only light the small lumens attached to Marcus's laser gun. I think we have to try, Steve replied. That's enough. They ran in silence for 3 minutes before encountering their first obstacle, a cultist patrol, 6 corrupted humans who'd been PDF soldiers once. Their mutations were fresher than the others Steve had seen, faces still mostly human beneath the lesions and bone growths, suggesting these had fallen to chaos recently. Throne's mercy, Marcus whispered. That's Corporal Jenks. He was in my squad. He went missing 2 weeks ago during a patrol sweep. The thing that had been Jenks turned toward them, and its eyes, too many eyes, placed at wrong angles, focused with terrible recognition. Marcus? Its voice was layered, harmonious and horrifying simultaneously. Why do you resist? The gifts of the Prince of Pleasure are infinite. Join us. Stop fighting. There is only ecstasy in surrender. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and he raised his laser gun with shaking hands. I'm so sorry, Jenks. Don't, Steve said quietly, stepping in front of Marcus. You shouldn't have to kill your friends. Let me. He's already dead, Marcus replied, voice hollow. I'm just finishing what chaos started. The last beam took Jenks through the forehead, and the corrupted corporal dropped without ceremony. The other cultists shrieked and charged, and Steve moved to intercept. His shield struck with precisely measured force, enough to kill because there was no saving these people, not anymore, but without the brutality that might break Marcus further. In 12 seconds, 6 corrupted former soldiers lay dead in the maintenance tunnel. Marcus stood over Jenks's body, silent tears tracking through the grime on his face. We need to keep moving, Steve said gently. I know. Marcus wiped his face roughly. I know, it's just... How many more of my friends am I going to have to kill before this is over? All of them probably, Steve said honestly. War doesn't give us clean choices, Trooper. It gives us impossible ones, and we do our best to choose the least terrible option. You gave Jenks mercy instead of letting him stay corrupted. That counts for something. They continued deeper into the underhive, and the air grew progressively worse, thicker, warmer, tainted with the sweet rot smell that Steve had learned meant warp corruption. The maintenance tunnels were narrower here, forcing them to move single file, and Steve's enhanced hearing detected movement all around them in parallel passages. The entire underhive had become an anthill of chaos activity. 2 minutes to the ventilation shaft, Marcus reported, checking his chronometer. Captain, when we drop into that chamber, what's the actual plan? Because I'm following you into literal hell, but some tactical guidance would be appreciated. Simple plan, Steve replied. I draw all the attention. You find whatever's anchoring the summoning ritual, symbols, sacrifices, ritual components, and destroy it. Every summoning has a focal point. Break that, we break the ritual. And if the focal point is defended by demons, then I fight demons while you work, Steve said. Marcus, I need you to understand something. When we drop into that chamber, there's a very good chance neither of us is walking out. I've made peace with that, have you? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, I made peace with dying 6 months ago, sir. What I hadn't made peace with was dying for nothing. But if we stop that summoning, if we give the junction a chance to hold, then my death means something. That's all any soldier can ask for. They reached the ventilation shaft, a vertical tunnel that rose 30 meters to a grating that, according to Marcus's schematics, opened directly above the ritual chamber. The sound coming through the grating was horrific, chanting in languages that hurt to hear, screaming that might have been pain or pleasure or both, and underneath it all, a rhythmic pulsing like a massive heartbeat. That's the rift, Marcus whispered. It's getting stronger. The greater demon is almost through. Steve looked up at the grating, calculating the drop, the landing zone, the likely enemy positions. Every tactical instinct he developed over decades of warfare was screaming that this was suicide, but every moral instinct he'd cultivated over those same decades was screaming that he had to try. On 3, Steve said. We breach, we move fast, we don't stop until the ritual is broken or we're dead. Clear? Clear, sir. 1. Steve's shield moved to his arm, secured perfectly. 2. Marcus checked his lace gun's charge pack, lips moving in what might have been prayer. 3. Steve's enhanced strength drove his shield upward, shattering the grating, and he pulled himself through the opening in one fluid motion. For a frozen second, he hung suspended above a chamber that redefined his understanding of horror. The ritual chamber had been a water processing facility once, a massive open space hundreds of meters across. Now it was a cathedral of corruption. The walls were covered in symbols painted in substances Steve didn't want to identify. The floor was a mosaic of bodies, some dead, some still twitching, arranged in geometric patterns that made his vision blur. And at the chamber center, a rift in reality gaped like a wound, purple-black energy bleeding into real space. And coming through that rift, already halfway manifested, was something Steve's mind struggled to process. It was vaguely humanoid, 4 meters tall, impossibly beautiful and horrifically wrong simultaneously. Its skin was flawless porcelain that revealed muscle and sinew beneath with every movement. It had too many limbs, each one ending in claw or blade or something that shifted between forms. And its face was perfect, absolutely, terrifyingly perfect, with features that were neither male nor female, but both and neither, arranged in a symmetry that human minds weren't meant to perceive. And it was smiling at him. "Welcome, little champion," the greater demon purred, its voice simultaneously seductive and horrifying. "We've been waiting for you. The Pleasure Prince knew you would come. Heroes always do." Surrounding the rift, hundreds of cultists turned toward Steve and Marcus as they dropped into the chamber, and the chanting increased in volume and intensity. Steve landed in a 3-point crouch, shield raised, and Marcus landed beside him, Lay's gun already firing at the nearest cluster of cultists. "I really hate it when they're expecting me," Steve muttered. "Sir, what now?" Marcus shouted over the ritual chanting. Steve looked at the greater demon manifesting through the rift, at the hundreds of cultists surrounding them, at the symbols of power carved into every surface, and he made the same decision he'd made 100 times before. He charged. "For Vardis!" Steve roared, and his shield led the way into the horde. Behind him, Marcus fired and moved, searching desperately for the ritual's anchor point, while the man with the star on his shield fought an impossible battle to buy him the seconds he needed. The siege had become personal, and in the warp, 4 dark gods leaned even closer, because this was entertainment. Steve Rogers had fought through a Hydra base in 1944, outnumbered 50-1. He'd led the Howling Commandos against impossible odds and won. He'd faced down entire armies and walked away. But fighting 300 cultists while a greater demon manifested behind him was pushing even his considerable limits. His shield became a blur of vibranium, blocking claws and blades that came from every angle. Each strike was calculated, not for maximum damage, but for maximum disruption. He couldn't kill 300 enemies, but he could make them get in each other's way, create cascading collisions in their ranks, turn their numbers against them. A cultist with arms elongated into whip-like appendages lashed at him. Steve caught one whip with his shield, yanked hard, and used the off-balance cultist as a projectile into 3 more. Another came from behind. His enhanced hearing caught the footstep, and Steve spun, shield extended, clotheslining the attacker with enough force to send them tumbling. But for every cultist he dropped, 2 more pressed forward. They weren't fighting with tactics or coordination. They were a tide of corrupted flesh driven by dark compulsion, and tides didn't tire or retreat. "The anchor!" Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. "I found it! North wall, 20 meters up. There's a sacrificial altar built into the old water tank." Steve's eyes flicked toward the indicated position, while simultaneously blocking 3 separate attacks. The altar was exactly where Marcus said, a grotesque construction of bone and brass, with channels carved to let blood flow in specific patterns. And chained to that altar was a figure Steve initially thought was another sacrifice, until he saw the ornate robes and the staff still clutched in skeletal hands. "That's a psyker!" Steve shouted back. "They're using a psyker as a living battery for the ritual." "Dead battery," Marcus corrected, firing up at the altar. His last beam scorched bone, but didn't disrupt whatever energy was flowing through the corpse. "The ritual killed them days ago, but the body's still channeling warp energy. We need to destroy the altar itself." Steve fought toward Marcus's position, his shield carving a path through corrupted flesh. But the greater demon was almost fully manifested now, and its attention had shifted from the ritual to Steve himself. "Such delicious determination," the demon purred, its voice causing ripples in reality. Such absolute conviction. The Dark Prince offers you pleasures beyond mortal comprehension, little champion. Power to save everyone you care about. Strength to never fail again. All the heroism you crave, without the tedious weight of mortality. Not interested, Steve grunted, slamming his shield into a cultist's sternum. I've heard better recruitment pitches from used car salesmen. The demon laughed, and the sound made Steve's inner ear scream protests. Humor is armor. How quaint. But you cannot win here, champion. Look around. Your companion fights valiantly, but he cannot reach the altar. You cannot reach the altar while holding back this horde. And even if you did, I am already manifested enough to remain without the ritual. You failed. How does that feel? Steve blocked another attack, countered with a shield bash that shattered corrupted ribs, and said through gritted teeth, "Like Tuesday." He shifted tactics. Raw determination wasn't working. He needed leverage, needed something to change the tactical equation. His eyes swept the chamber, analyzing structure, and he spotted it. The old water tank Marcus had mentioned was still partially full, held in place by support struts that looked corroded and unstable. "Marcus!" Steve called out. "The support struts on the tank's northeast corner. Can you target them?" "I see them, but..." Marcus's eyes widened with understanding. Oh, that's insane, sir." "Good tactics usually are. On my mark." Steve changed direction, fighting not toward the altar, but toward the greater demon itself. The cultists screamed frustration and pursued, exactly as he'd hoped. He needed to concentrate enemy forces directly beneath that tank. The demon smiled wider, which should have been impossible, but somehow wasn't. "Approaching me directly? How bold, or how foolish. Let me show you why mortals fear the champions of Slaanesh." It moved, and Steve's enhanced perception barely tracked the speed. The demon's clawed hand swept toward him with enough force to shatter stone. Steve raised his shield, and vibranium did its job. The energy absorbed, dispersed, redirected into the ground beneath his feet. But the impact still drove him back 3 meters, boots carving trenches in the corrupted floor. "Impressive," the demon acknowledged. "That shield is not of this reality. How curious, how delectable. Perhaps I shall keep it as a trophy." "You're welcome to try," Steve replied, and he launched himself forward. What followed was a battle that would be whispered about in PDF barracks for generations. Captain America versus a greater demon of Slaanesh, fought in close quarters with nothing but a shield and superhuman determination. The demon struck with limbs that changed forms mid-attack, sometimes claws, sometimes blades, sometimes things that defied classification. Steve blocked, parried, and when he saw openings, struck back with precisely placed shield strikes that rang against demonic flesh, with sounds like cracked bells. He couldn't hurt it meaningfully. His shield could disrupt lesser demons. But this thing was orders of magnitude more powerful. But he didn't need to hurt it. He just needed to keep it focused on him and draw the cultist horde into position. "Marcus!" Steve shouted while blocking a 4-hit combination that would have bisected a normal human. "Now!" Marcus's laser gun barked, concentrated beams striking the corroded support struts exactly where they were weakest. Metal screamed, then buckled, and the entire water tank, containing thousands of gallons of contaminated liquid, collapsed. The wave hit the ritual chamber like a tsunami. Cultists swept away by the sudden flood, and more importantly, it struck the altar. Ancient bone and brass couldn't withstand several tons of water moving at high velocity. The altar shattered, the psyker's corpse torn free from its restraints, and the ritual's anchor point was destroyed. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The rift began to collapse, purple-black energy sucking backward like a drain opened beneath reality. The greater demon shrieked, not in pain but in fury, as its manifestation started to unravel. "No!" it howled, its perfect face contorting into something monstrous. "Centuries of preparation. The prince's will denied by mortals. You will pay for this defiance." "Get in line," Steve replied, and he hit the demon with a shield strike that would have killed a mortal instantly. It didn't kill the greater demon. Nothing short of absolute banishment could, but combined with the collapsing ritual, it was enough. The demon was pulled backwards through the closing rift, screaming curses in languages that hurt Steve's enhanced hearing. Around them, cultists who'd been empowered by the demon's presence suddenly found their mutations failing, corruption receding, and in many cases, their mortal bodies couldn't survive the rapid transformation back. They collapsed by the dozens, dying from the shock of losing their dark gifts. The rift closed with a sound like reality, sighing in relief, and sudden silence fell across the chamber. Steve stood in 2 feet of contaminated water, shield still raised, scanning for remaining threats. Marcus emerged from behind cover, soaked and shaking, but alive. "We did it," Marcus whispered. "Emperor's mercy, we actually did it." Steve lowered his shield, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. Fighting 300 cultists and a greater demon had pushed even his enhanced endurance to its limits. "Good shooting on those struts. Quick thinking." "You created the opportunity," Marcus replied. He looked around the chamber at the carnage, hundreds of cultist corpses, broken ritual components, and the slowly dissipating corruption that had saturated the space. "This is going to become legend, you know. The Star Bearer and the collapse of the Great Summoning. They'll tell this story for generations." "If we survive long enough for there to be generations," Steve corrected, "we still need to get back to Junction Primus. And between us and there are..." An explosion rocked the chamber, shaking loose debris from the ceiling. Then another, and another, rhythmic and devastating, coming from the direction of the junction. "The main assault," Marcus said, voice tight with realization. "The cultists didn't cancel their attack just because we disrupted the ritual. The junction is under siege and we're stuck here." Steve was already moving toward the chamber's exit. "Then we fight our way back." "Come on!" They ran through maintenance tunnels that were now flooding with contaminated water from the collapsed tank, pursued by the sounds of distant battle. Steve's enhanced hearing picked up last fire, screams, and the distinctive roar of heavy stubbers on full automatic. The junction was fighting for its life. 2 minutes out," Marcus panted, struggling to keep up with Steve's enhanced pace. "But sir, we're going to arrive behind enemy lines. The cultists will be concentrated at the junction's defensive perimeter." "Then we'll hit them from behind," Steve replied. "Create confusion, force them to split their attention. It's called a hammer and anvil tactic. The junction is the anvil, we're the hammer." They burst from the maintenance tunnels into the western approach corridor, and Steve got his first look at the main assault. It was everything the probe attack had been, magnified by 20. Thousands of cultists pressed against the PDF defensive line, which was holding through sheer desperate determination and concentrated fire. But the line was bending, sandbag emplacements collapsed under sustained assault, and Steve could see soldiers falling. "PDF, this is Star Bearer," Steve shouted into Marcus's Voxcaster. "The ritual is broken. The greater demon is banished. All units, hold the line. Reinforcements are coming." "Reinforcements?" Colonel Vestra's voice crackled back, strain evident. "Captain, you're behind enemy lines with 1 trooper. That's not reinforcements, that's..." Her words were drowned out by the sound Steve made as he charged the cultist rear ranks at full speed. The impact was catastrophic. Steve hit the cultist formation like a cannonball. His shield extended, and corrupted bodies flew in every direction. He'd been fighting carefully before, trying to disable rather than kill when possible. Now there was no time for careful. Every second PDF soldiers were dying, and careful meant slow. His shield struck with lethal force, each impact precisely calculated to drop enemies permanently. He moved like a berserker, but a berserker with perfect tactical awareness, always knowing where the next threat was coming from, always positioning himself to create maximum disruption. Cultists tried to surround him, tried to bring him down through overwhelming numbers. They failed. Steve fought with every technique he learned across decades of warfare. Boxing from his Brooklyn youth, military combatives from basic training, advanced martial arts from shield training, and combat philosophy from fighting alongside gods. His shield was both offense and defense, blocking attacks and delivering devastating counters in the same motion. Marcus fought beside him, laser gun barking constantly, dropping cultists who tried to flank Steve's position. The trooper was clearly exhausted, clearly terrified, but he didn't break. He'd chosen to follow Captain America into impossible odds, and he was seeing it through. The PDF saw what was happening, saw their star-bearer fighting behind enemy lines, carving through the cultist rear ranks like divine retribution. And something changed in their defense. Exhaustion fell away. Despair transformed into fury. They'd been holding the line because they had to. Now they held because they wanted to, because they refused to let this man fight alone. All units, advancing fire! Vestra's voice roared over the Vox. Press forward, support the Star-Bearer. For Vardis, for the Emperor, for the man who taught us to fight again. The PDF surged forward, and suddenly the cultists were caught between two forces. The defensive line pushing outward with renewed ferocity, and Steve Rogers cutting through their rear ranks like a force of nature. The cultist formation, already disorganized by the failed ritual and demon banishment, shattered completely. They broke, they ran, and the PDF pursued, last fire cutting down fleeing enemies who'd seemed invincible just hours before. Steve stopped in the center of the junction, breathing hard, covered in blood and filth, surrounded by PDF soldiers who'd just won a battle that should have been unwinnable. For a moment, there was only silence. The shocked silence of people who'd expected to die and instead stood victorious. Then someone started chanting, "Star-Bearer! Star-Bearer! Star-Bearer!" The chant spread, growing louder, until 1,200 voices were shouting the name in unison. Steve tried to wave them down, tried to deflect the adulation, but Colonel Vestra appeared beside him and gripped his shoulder. "Let them have this," she said quietly. "Let them celebrate. Emperor knows they've earned it. You gave them something I thought we'd lost. You gave them victory." "We gave them victory," Steve corrected. "I just showed up. They did the fighting, the dying, the holding. They're the heroes." "Then we're all heroes today," Vestra replied. "But you're the one they'll remember. The man who fell from the sky and reminded us what fighting for something actually means." In the hours that followed, as the PDF consolidated their victory and medical teams treated the wounded, reports came in from across Vardis Prime. The cultist forces were in disarray, their leadership fragmented by the demon's banishment. PDF units that had been on the verge of collapse were suddenly holding ground, even pushing back. The tide was turning. Steve sat against a wall, too tired to stand, shield resting beside him, and Marcus brought him a canteen of water that tasted like rust, but Steve drank it anyway. "Sir," Marcus said hesitantly, "what you said in the ritual chamber about this feeling like Tuesday, did you mean that? Is this just another day for you?" Steve considered the question. "Every battle feels impossible while you're fighting it. Doesn't matter if it's street thugs in Brooklyn or demon cults in the Underhive. The fear is the same. The stakes feel just as high. The difference is experience. I've been in enough impossible situations to know that impossible just means difficult, and difficult means you keep fighting until you find a way." "How do you keep going?" Marcus asked. "How do you fight these battles over and over without breaking?" "I break all the time," Steve admitted. "I just don't stay broken. That's the secret, Marcus. Not that heroes never fall, but that we stand back up when we do. And the reason I stand up is people like you. Soldiers who volunteer for suicide missions because they believe it matters. Colonels who hold the line against impossible odds because civilians need protecting. That's what keeps me going. Knowing that courage isn't unique to me, it's something everyone has. I just help people remember it." A commotion at the junction entrance interrupted them. Steve struggled to his feet, hand moving to his shield out of instinct. But Vestra appeared with an expression that mixed awe and concern. "Captain Rogers," she said formally, "we have visitors. They arrived via drop pod 17 minutes ago, attracted by the sudden shift in warp energy when you banished the demon. I should warn you, what's coming is both our greatest hope for survival and potentially our greatest threat to you personally." "Who?" Steve asked. As if in answer, a figure appeared at the junction entrance that made every PDF soldier in sight snap to immediate attention. It was a giant, easily 8 feet tall, clad in ornate power armor that was deep crimson with gold accents. The armor bore symbols that looked like blood drops and angel wings, and the figure's helmet was mag-locked to their belt, revealing a pale, aristocratic face with eyes that held centuries of warfare. "I am Captain Dante of the Blood Angels Space Marines," the figure said, voice resonant with authority, and something Steve recognized instantly. Command presence earned through impossible battles. "Third Company, we detected a massive warp disturbance originating from this world and made immediate combat insertion. We expected to find a planet fall into chaos, requiring exterminatus." He paused, eyes scanning the junction, the defensive positions, the PDF soldiers, and finally Steve himself. "Instead, we find a holding action successful beyond probability. A demon banishment achieved without psyker support or blessed weapons. And at the center of it all, continue a warrior in strange armor, bearing a symbol we do not recognize, who has somehow inspired PDF troopers to impossible victory." Dante's expression was unreadable. "I am told you call yourself Captain America, that you appeared from nowhere and claimed to be from another world entirely, that you killed demons with your bare hands and rallied broken soldiers into heroes." Steve straightened despite his exhaustion, meeting the Space Marine's gaze without flinching. "That's an accurate summary, and you're here to decide if I'm an asset or a threat." "We are here," Dante corrected, "to determine if you are human, Xenos, or something worse wearing human skin. The Imperium has learned to be cautious of miracles, Captain. They usually come with a price written in blood and souls." "Then test me however you need to," Steve said, echoing what he told Colonel Vestra hours ago. "I've got nothing to hide. But while you're deciding whether to kill me or recruit me, those 10,000 civilians in the shelter need evacuation. The cultists are broken now, but they'll regroup. Get the people out first. Judge me after." Dante's expression shifted, not quite respect, but acknowledgement of priorities that aligned with his own. "The civilians will be evacuated. The Blood Angels do not abandon the Emperor's subjects." He stepped closer, towering over Steve, studying him with eyes that had seen millennia of warfare. "But you, Captain America, present a more complex problem. You have saved this world from damnation. That much is evident. But you have also inspired something dangerous: hope." "Why is hope dangerous?" Steve asked, genuinely confused. "Because hope breeds independence," a new voice said, and another figure appeared, smaller than the Space Marine but somehow more threatening. She wore black armor adorned with skulls and the Imperial symbol, and her eyes held the absolute certainty of someone with unlimited authority. "Hope makes people question. Question leads to doubt. Doubt is the first step toward heresy. I am Inquisitor Corvin of the Ordo Hereticus, and you, Captain America, are the most dangerous thing I've encountered in decades of hunting witches and heretics." Steve's hand tightened on his shield. "I saved these people." "From one threat," Corvin acknowledged, "but you may represent another. You appeared during a chaos incursion through unknown means. You possess impossible weapons and abilities. You speak of other worlds and inspire fanatical loyalty among Imperial citizens. These are all hallmarks of either Xenos infiltration or chaos corruption, so subtle it defies standard detection." "I'm neither," Steve said firmly. "I'm a soldier who fights for people who can't fight for themselves. That's all I've ever been." "That's what every heretic believes," Corvin replied, "that their way is righteous, their cause just, their methods necessary. The road to damnation is paved with good intentions, Captain." "Inquisitor," Captain Dante interjected, "perhaps this discussion should continue in a more secure location. The PDF has earned respite, and we have much to investigate before rendering judgment." "Agreed," Corvin said, but her eyes never left Steve. "Captain America, you will accompany us to our command vessel for comprehensive examination. Your compliance is not optional. Resist, and even your considerable abilities will not save you from an entire Space Marine strike force." Steve looked at Colonel Vestra, who gave him a helpless expression. This was so far beyond her authority, it might as well be happening on a different planet. He looked at Marcus and the other PDF soldiers, saw their expressions mixing hope with fear. They'd followed him into hell. He couldn't repay that by starting a fight with their rescuers. "I'll cooperate," Steve said, "but I have conditions. The PDF gets full credit for this victory. Colonel Vestra and her soldiers are treated as the heroes they are, not blamed for whatever you decide I am. And those civilians get evacuated before anything else. You are not in a position to make demands, Corvin said coldly. And yet I'm making them anyway, Steve replied with equal chill. You want me to cooperate? Those are my terms. I've been interrogated by organizations scarier than yours, Inquisitor. I'm willing to answer every question you have, submit to every test. But those people down there fought alongside me. They don't deserve punishment for my actions. Dante studied Steve for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Your terms are acceptable. The PDF will be recognized for their heroism. The civilians will be prioritized for evacuation, and you will submit to examination aboard the Sanguine Valor. This is agreeable to you, Inquisitor? Corvin's expression suggested it was not, but she recognized political reality when she saw it. Acceptable. But Captain America, understand this. If our examination reveals any taint of chaos, any hint of Xenos manipulation, any evidence that you are a threat to the Imperium, I will have you executed. Your heroism today will not save you. Am I clear? Crystal, Steve replied. He turned to Colonel Vestra and extended his hand. She took it, and Steve felt her grip tighten with emotion she was fighting to control. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. For reminding us what we were fighting for showing us that victory was possible, for being a soldier when you needed one, Steve finished. Colonel, your PDF is one of the finest military units I've served with. You held impossible odds with limited resources and never gave up. That's not just good soldiering, that's heroism. Make sure that gets recorded in whatever official reports you file. He moved through the PDF ranks, shaking hands, learning names one last time, offering words of encouragement to soldiers who looked at him like he was something more than human. Steve knew that look. He'd seen it on civilians' faces after saving them, on soldiers' faces after impossible victories. It was the look of people who needed something to believe in, and he'd become that symbol. The responsibility of it weighed heavier than vibranium. Marcus was the last to say goodbye. The young trooper saluted with parade ground precision, and Steve returned it with equal formality. Sir, whatever happens up there, whatever they decide about you, we'll remember. Every PDF trooper on Vardis will remember the Star Bearer. We'll tell our children, and they'll tell theirs. You won't be forgotten. Make sure you tell them the truth, Steve said. I'm not a saint or a savior. I'm just a soldier who refused to give up. If you remember that same refusal is in all of you, then my being here mattered. Captain Dante gestured toward the junction exit. The dropship awaits, Captain America. It is time. Steve picked up his shield, felt its familiar weight settle on his arm, and followed the Blood Angel toward whatever judgment awaited. Behind him, the PDF watched their star-bearer depart, uncertain if they'd ever see him again, certain only that he'd changed their world forever. In the warp, the four dark gods were no longer amused, they were interested. And in the Imperium's vast bureaucratic machine, report after report began filtering up chains of command, all asking the same question: who was Captain America, and what did his arrival mean for the Eternal War? The Sanguine Valor hung in low orbit above Vardis Prime, like a crimson cathedral, its Gothic architecture defying conventional ship design in favor of something that was equal parts warship and flying monastery. Steve watched through the dropship's viewport as they approached, trying to process the sheer scale. The vessel was easily 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapon batteries that could level continents, and adorned with statues of angels and skulls that seemed to stare accusingly at anyone approaching. First time seeing an Astartes battle barge? Captain Dante asked from his position across the dropship's troop bay. The Space Marine hadn't removed his helmet during the flight, but his voice carried a hint of something that might have been amusement. First time seeing a ship that looks like someone weaponized a cathedral, Steve replied honestly. Where I'm from, military vessels tend toward function over whatever this is. The architecture serves a purpose beyond aesthetics, Dante explained. It reminds us what we fight for. The Imperium's ships are temples to humanity's survival, mobile fortresses that carry the Emperor's light into the darkness. Every statue, every skull, every Gothic arch, they're declarations of faith made manifest. Faith in a dead god kept alive by sacrifice, Steve said quietly, remembering what Colonel Vestra had told him about the Emperor. That's what your Imperium is built on? The temperature in the dropship seemed to drop. Inquisitor Corvin, who'd been silent during the flight, leaned forward with eyes that promised violence. Careful, Captain. What you call a dead god is the Emperor of mankind, master of humanity, the Omnissiah made flesh. To speak of him with such casual disrespect borders on heresy. I'm not disrespecting anything, Steve said, meeting her glare without flinching. I'm trying to understand. In my world, we fought against systems that demanded absolute loyalty and punished questioning. You're describing something similar, and I need to know, am I helping heroes or tyrants? You're helping humanity survive, Dante said before Corvin could respond. The Imperium is brutal because the galaxy is brutal. We are beset on all sides by Xenos that would extinct us, chaos that would corrupt us, and traitors who would damn us. The Emperor's regime is harsh because anything less would see humanity destroyed within a generation. You witnessed Vardis Prime. That is what awaits every world if we show weakness. I've heard that argument before, Steve replied, usually from people who used fear to justify oppression. Give up your freedom and we'll keep you safe. It never ends well. And what alternative do you propose? Corvin demanded. Democracy? Individual liberty? Those are luxuries only possible when extinction isn't imminent. The Imperium stands because it is willing to make choices your idealistic philosophies would never permit. We sacrifice billions to save trillions. We burn worlds to stop chaos from spreading. We execute innocents who might be corrupted because preventing one demon manifestation is worth 100 false positives. These are monstrous choices, but they are necessary. Steve wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that there was always another way, that compromise with evil was still evil. But he'd seen the demon, felt the corruption, watched it twist human beings into weapons against themselves. He'd faced nothing like it in his own universe, nothing that infected souls and turned love itself into damnation. I don't have answers yet, he admitted, but I know this. If fighting monsters means becoming monsters, then you've already lost. There has to be a line somewhere. The line, Dante said quietly, is loyalty to the species. Everything else is negotiable. Remember that during your examination, Captain. The Inquisitor will test not just your body, but your philosophy. If you cannot accept the Imperium's necessary evils, you will be judged heretical regardless of your heroism. The dropship docked with a sound like cathedral bells, and the rear ramp lowered onto a hangar bay that could have housed several city blocks. Space Marines in red armor moved with practiced efficiency. Servitors, Steve felt his stomach turn as he realized they were lobotomized humans grafted to machinery, performed maintenance tasks with mechanical precision, and everywhere, the religious iconography was overwhelming. This way, Corvin said, gesturing toward a corridor that stretched into darkness. The examination chambers are prepared. They walked through corridors that were equal parts starship and temple, passing murals depicting space marines in glorious combat, shrines to fallen heroes, and something Steve initially thought was decoration, before realizing with horror that they were actual human skulls embedded in the walls. How many people died building the ship? He asked, unable to help himself. Thousands, Dante replied without apparent shame. Constructing a battle barge requires a generation of labor, and accidents are common. But their deaths served the Emperor, and their sacrifice enabled this vessel to protect millions. In the Imperium, death in service is the highest honor. In my world, we call that a workplace safety violation, Steve muttered. They arrived at a massive door emblazoned with the inquisitorial symbol, a stylized eye with a skull at its center. Corvin pressed her palm against a recognition panel, and the door groaned open to reveal a chamber that made Steve's blood run cold. It was an interrogation room, but on a scale and with technology that made Hydra's worst facilities look humane. The walls were lined with instruments Steve couldn't identify, but recognized instinctively as implements of torture. There were devices for reading minds, machines for detecting chaos corruption, and in the center, a chair with enough restraints to hold something considerably stronger than human. Is this really necessary? Steve asked, hand tightening on his shield. Completely, Corvin replied. You will be subjected to psychic interrogation, biological sampling, technological analysis, and theological examination. If you are truly uncorrupted, you will survive with minimal permanent damage. If you are tainted, you will not leave this room alive. Define minimal permanent damage, Steve said. Brain tissue sampling, genetic sequencing, exposure to blessed silver and holy radiation, psychic intrusion into your deepest memories, and chemical analysis of your cellular structure. Corvin's expression was clinical, devoid of empathy. Most subjects experience significant trauma. Many do not retain full cognitive function afterwards, but these are acceptable costs for certainty. No, Steve said flatly. I agreed to examination. I didn't agree to torture. You don't have a choice, Corvin began, but Dante raised a hand. Inquisitor, perhaps a less invasive initial assessment would be prudent. Captain America has cooperated thus far. Driving him to resistance through excessive methodology serves no purpose. Are you questioning my authority, Space Marine? Corvin's voice dropped to dangerous levels. I am exercising my chapter's right to observe and counsel, Dante replied carefully. The Blood Angels have served alongside the Inquisition for millennia. We understand your mandate, but we also understand that destroying potentially valuable assets through overzealous examination is wasteful. Test him, certainly, but perhaps reserve the most extreme measures for if initial assessments reveal corruption? Corvin's jaw clenched, but she nodded curtly. Very well. Initial assessment protocol. Captain America, remove your armor and surrender your shield. You will submit to scanning and preliminary questioning. Resistance will be interpreted as evidence of corruption. Steve looked at his shield, at the star that had represented everything he fought for across decades of warfare, and made a choice. He'd come this far on trust. One more step wouldn't kill him. Probably. He removed his upper armor, what remained of it after the battle, and handed his shield to Dante. The Space Marine took it with surprising reverence, studying the vibranium disc with interest. This material, Dante said, running a gauntleted finger across the surface. It should not exist. Vibranium, you called it. Our cogitators have no record of such an element. Its molecular structure defies standard physics, and yet it clearly functions. How? Different universe, different periodic table, Steve replied, submitting to Corvin's scanning devices, mechanical arms that extended from the walls, and began analyzing his body with beams of light that made his skin prickle. Where I'm from, vibranium is the rarest material on Earth. It absorbs kinetic energy and redistributes it. That's why it works so well as a shield. Impacts just get absorbed instead of transferred. Impossible, Corvin said, reading data streaming across her cogitator screens. No material can absorb energy without limit. That violates thermodynamics. So do your daemons, Steve pointed out. I'm starting to think physics works differently here. The scanning continued for what felt like hours. Machines analyzed his muscle density, bone structure, nervous system, and something Corvin called his soul signature, apparently measuring for warp corruption. Steve endured it with the same stoic patience he'd shown during medical experiments in 1941, when they were testing the super soldier serum's effects. Finally, Corvin stepped back, her expression caught between confusion and reluctant acceptance. Biologically, you're human. Enhanced significantly beyond normal parameters, but human. No Xenos genetics detected, no chaos mutations, no demonic taint. Your cellular structure shows evidence of artificial enhancement, but nothing that registers as tech heresy. You're clean. Told you, Steve said. That proves nothing about your origins or loyalties, Corvin countered. You could be a sleeper agent, programmed so deeply you don't know your own corruption. We need deeper examination, psychic interrogation to access your memories directly. No, Steve said firmly. I've been inside my own head enough to know what's there. You want to know my history, my motivations, my loyalties? Ask. I'll answer truthfully. But I'm not letting anyone root around in my brain without my consent. You don't get to refuse. Inquisitor, Dante interrupted again, and this time there was steel in his voice. I have been observing Captain America since we met. I have 900 years of experience reading warriors, detecting corruption, and identifying threats. This man is uncorrupted. His soul blazes with conviction that I have seen in only the most faithful servants of the Emperor. He is not chaos-tainted. He is not Xenos-controlled. He is simply what he claims, a soldier from another reality, fighting for principles he believes in. Your assessment is noted but insufficient, Corvin said coldly. I require certainty. Then ask your questions, Steve said, sitting on the examination table despite its restraints. You want to know my story? Here it is. I was born in Brooklyn in 1918, grew up poor, sickly, watching bullies hurt people who couldn't fight back. When World War II started, I volunteered despite being rejected 5 times for medical reasons. Got selected for an experimental program called Project Rebirth. They gave me a serum that made me peak human, stronger, faster, tougher. I became Captain America, fought Nazis and Hydra, got frozen in ice in 1945, woke up 70 years later, fought alongside heroes called the Avengers, saved the world more times than I can count. Then a weapon tore reality open, and I ended up here, in a universe even darker than the one I left. He met Corvin's eyes. Every choice I've made, every battle I've fought, it's been for the same reason. I can't stand by and watch people get hurt when I can help. That's it. That's my whole philosophy. You can call it idealistic, naive, whatever you want, but it's kept me human through impossible situations. And it's the only compass I trust. Silence filled the interrogation chamber. Corvin studied him with an expression that suggested she was internally debating whether to accept his words or continue pushing for invasive examination. The serum you mentioned, Dante said thoughtfully, it enhanced you to peak human capability. That implies your species has theoretical limits you've reached. Interesting. Space Marines are enhanced beyond human limits through genetic modification and organ implantation. Perhaps your serum and our process share philosophical foundations. Maybe, Steve acknowledged, though I get the feeling your process is a lot more extreme. It has a 90% mortality rate, Dante said casually, but those who survive become the Emperor's angels of death. Your survival of enhancement, your dedication to service, your refusal to compromise your principles despite impossible circumstances. These are qualities we value in the Blood Angels. You would have made an excellent Space Marine. I'd rather stay human, thanks, Steve replied. No offense, but from what I've seen, you Space Marines sacrifice a lot to become what you are. I've seen what happens when you give up humanity to fight monsters. Eventually, you can't tell the difference. And there is your fundamental incompatibility with the Imperium, Corvin said, as if Steve had proven her point. You cling to ideals that have no place in the reality we inhabit. Humanity is a luxury we cannot afford. The Imperium survives because we are willing to become monsters to fight monsters. Your refusal to accept this necessity makes you dangerous. Not because you're evil, but because you inspire others to question what must not be questioned. So you're saying my crime is making people think? Steve asked. Yes, Corvin said bluntly. Thought leads to doubt. Doubt leads to hesitation. Hesitation leads to death. In the Imperium, blind faith and absolute obedience are survival mechanisms. Your philosophy of individual conscience and personal morality is a disease that will kill everyone it infects. Steve stood, retrieved his shield from Dante, and faced the Inquisitor with the same expression he'd worn when facing down Thanos, Red Skull, and every tyrant he'd ever opposed. Then I guess we have a fundamental disagreement about what's worth surviving for. In my experience, people who demand blind faith are usually hiding something they don't want examined. And systems that punish questioning are usually built on lies they can't afford to have exposed. Are you calling the Imperium a lie? Corvin's hand moved to her sidearm. I'm saying any system that requires torture and oppression to maintain itself is fundamentally broken, Steve replied. You can call it necessary all you want. Doesn't make it right. The interrogation chamber crackled with tension. Corvin looked ready to execute Steve on the spot. Dante stood between them, an 8-foot giant in power armor, and somehow Steve got the feeling the Space Marine was protecting him rather than restraining him. This is going nowhere productive, Dante said finally. Inquisitor, you have confirmed Captain America is uncorrupted and non-hostile. His philosophical disagreements with Imperial doctrine are noted, but not actionable as heresy unless he actively works against the Imperium. I recommend releasing him to my custody for observation and potential integration into our operations. Your recommendation is noted and rejected, Corvin replied. Captain America represents an ideological threat that exceeds physical corruption. I will not have him spreading his poisonous philosophies among Imperial citizens. He will remain in custody pending... The ship's alarm interrupted her, a deep klaxon that made Steve's enhanced hearing scream protests. Dante's expression hardened, and he touched a vox bead in his helmet. Report, he commanded. Captain, we have multiple warp breach signatures across the Vardis system, a voice crackled back. Chaos fleet emerging from the Immaterium. Estimated composition, 3 cruiser-class vessels, 17 escort frigates, and something massive we can't properly identify. They're moving to engage. All hands to combat stations. Dante's expression darkened. The enemy responds faster than anticipated. They must have sensed the demon's banishment and moved to reclaim the world before we can fully fortify it. He looked at Steve. Captain America, our philosophical debate will have to wait. The Chaos fleet outguns us 3-1, and we have 10,000 civilians still evacuating from the surface. We need every advantage we can muster. Are you suggesting we arm him? Corvin demanded. Give a potential heretic access to weapons during combat. I'm suggesting we use a proven warrior who's demonstrated he kills demons effectively, Dante countered. You want certainty about his loyalties? Let's see what he does when chaos comes knocking. Actions speak louder than examination. Steve was already moving toward the door. Where do you need me? Bridge first, Dante said, falling in beside him. We assess the tactical situation, then deploy where you're most effective. And Captain, the Space Marine's voice carried grim certainty. This battle will likely end with the Sanguine Valor destroyed and all hands lost. Chaos does not accept defeat gracefully. Are you prepared to die for people you've known less than a day? Steve thought of the PDF soldiers on Vardis, of the civilians sheltering in the Underhive, of Marcus and Colonel Vestra, and Trooper Vesk, and all the others who'd fought beside him. He thought about what Captain America meant, what the shield represented, and why he'd spent his entire life standing between innocent people and evil. I've been ready to die for strangers since 1941, he said. Why stop now? The bridge of the Sanguine Valor was a cathedral of war, a vast chamber lined with tactical displays, weapon control stations, and crew pits where servitors and chapter serfs worked in synchronized precision. At its center stood a command throne, occupied by a space marine whose armor was more ornate than Dante's, marking him as the ship's master. Brother Captain Leonidas, Dante said formally, I bring Captain America, the warrior responsible for Vardis Prime's unexpected survival. Leonidas turned and Steve found himself facing a giant whose face was half covered in ornate augmetics. The captain's one remaining organic eye studied Steve with an intensity that suggested he was being measured for both threat and value simultaneously. The Starbearer, Leonidas said, voice resonant through Vox amplifiers. Your reputation precedes you. My brothers on the surface report you fought with skill that rivals our own chapter's veterans. Impressive for a baseline human. He gestured to the tactical display dominating the bridge's center. Unfortunately, individual prowess means little against a fleet engagement. Our situation is dire. Steve approached the hololithic projection showing the Vardis system in real time. The Sanguine Valor hung near the planet, a single red icon. Arrayed against it were dozens of hostile signatures, their ship markers bearing symbols that hurt to look at directly. Stylized representations of the Chaos gods. 3-1 odds, Steve assessed, his tactical mind automatically analyzing formations and approach vectors. Their cruisers are moving to bracket you, pin you against the planet so you can't maneuver. The frigates are screening for torpedoes and fighter launches. That massive contact in the rear. That's their command ship? A Chaos Grand Cruiser, Leonidas confirmed with grim respect for Steve's rapid assessment. Likely commandeered from Imperial Navy decades ago and corrupted beyond recognition. It outguns the Sanguine Valor 2-1. Alone, we might attempt to disengage and escape to the warp, but the civilian transports are still loading refugees. We cannot abandon them. So we buy time, Steve said. How long until evacuation is complete? 73 minutes, a chapter serf reported from a data station. Current transport capacity is insufficient. We're loading beyond safety margins. Then we hold for 73 minutes, Dante said, as if it were simple. Captain Leonidas, I recommend Alpha Strike formation. Concentrate all batteries on the nearest cruiser. If we can cripple or destroy one early, we improve our numerical disadvantage. Negative, Leonidas replied. Our void shields cannot withstand concentrated return fire from all three cruisers simultaneously. We'd be destroyed before inflicting critical damage. We must fight defensively, use the planet's gravity well to our advantage, make them come to us. They'll just bombard from range, Steve interjected, studying the tactical display with growing understanding. Their goal isn't to capture the ship, it's to stop the evacuation. They can sit back and launch ordnance at the transports. You'll be forced to either intercept, exposing yourself to their cruisers, or let civilians die. Leonidas's augmetic eye focused on Steve with renewed interest. You understand void warfare, Captain America. I've fought in space before, Steve replied, memories of Sanctuary 2 and Thanos' fleet surfacing. Different ships, different weapons, but tactics are tactics. The enemy has numbers and firepower. We have maneuverability and motivation. We need to turn their strength into weakness. How? Leonidas demanded. Steve pointed to the asteroid field marked on the hololithic display, remnants of a destroyed moon orbiting beyond Vardis Prime. Move the transports there. The asteroids will provide cover from long-range bombardment. Then take the Sanguine Valor and engage aggressively, not to destroy their fleet, but to keep them focused on you instead of the transports. You become the loudest, most dangerous target they can't ignore. That's suicide, Inquisitor Corvin said, having followed them to the bridge. The moment we commit to aggressive engagement, we're surrounded and destroyed. Maybe, Steve acknowledged, but it buys the transports time to finish loading and escape. Isn't that worth a ship? The Sanguine Valor is a relic of the chapter, irreplaceable, containing gene seed and sacred relics dating back to Sanguinius himself, Leonidas said heavily. To sacrifice it for 10,000 civilians, that's not a trade the Imperium would typically make. Then the Imperium's priorities are wrong, Steve replied bluntly. A ship is metal and machinery. It can be rebuilt. Those people can't. You speak as if life has value beyond service, Corvin observed coldly. This is why your philosophy is dangerous. In the Imperium, a battle barge's strategic value outweighs 10,000 civilian lives. That's mathematics, not cruelty. It's both, Steve said, and it's wrong. You can't put a price on innocent lives. We put prices on lives constantly, Leonidas said, but his tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. The question becomes, what calculation do we use? Inquisitor Corvin is correct by Imperial doctrine. This ship's value exceeds the civilian's worth. But Captain Dante's assessment of Captain America suggested he fights with the Emperor's light in his soul. Perhaps his instinct carries wisdom we should heed. You're actually considering this? Corvin's voice rose. Sacrificing a battle barge because an outsider with no understanding of our reality suggests it? I'm considering, Leonidas replied carefully, that the Emperor protects those who protect his subjects. We are the angels of death, yes, but we are also his defenders of humanity. What use is our strength if we hoard it like treasures instead of spending it for those we're sworn to protect? The bridge fell silent except for the constant stream of tactical updates as the Chaos fleet drew closer. Steve watched these warriors, genetically engineered post-humans who could kill him with casual effort, debate the worth of human life, and he realized something crucial. They weren't monsters. They'd been trained to be monsters, shaped by a system that demanded monstrous choices, but underneath the indoctrination and the horror, they still cared. They were just afraid to admit it, because caring was weakness in a galaxy that devoured the weak. 71 minutes until evacuation complete, the chapter surf updated. Chaos fleet entering extreme weapons range. Captain Leonidas, Dante said formally, I support Captain America's tactical assessment. We move the transports to the asteroid field, then engage the Chaos fleet aggressively to draw their attention. It's the best chance those civilians have. And likely the last battle of this ship, Leonidas replied. He looked at Steve. You've spent less than a day in our Imperium, Captain America. You've seen our brutality, our compromises, our necessary evils. And you're still suggesting we sacrifice our greatest asset to save people you don't even know. Why? Because that's what heroes do, Steve said simply. We don't calculate worth. We don't measure value. We see people who need help, and we help them, even if it costs us everything. Leonidas stared at him for a long moment, then turned to his command throne. All hands, combat stations, helm, plot course to engage the Chaos Fleet at closest safe distance. Gunnery, prepare all weapons batteries. Launch decks, prepare Thunderhawk squadrons for defensive interdiction. And send word to the transports. New rally point in the asteroid field. We're buying them time. Acknowledged, multiple voices responded across the bridge. This is heresy against the Imperium's resource management doctrine, Corvin said flatly. I will file reports with the Inquisition Ordos. File them from the evacuation transports, Leonidas replied. Inquisitor, you are to transfer to the lead transport immediately. Your presence aboard is no longer required, and your survival ensures our actions are documented properly. It was a diplomatic ejection, and Corvin recognized it immediately. You're removing me from the battlefield. I'm preserving a valuable Inquisitor for future service, Leonidas corrected. The sanguine valor may not survive this engagement. You must. Corvin looked between Leonidas, Dante, and Steve, her expression suggesting she understood exactly what was happening. She was being sent away because they didn't trust her not to interfere with their decision to save civilians over doctrine. Very well, but Captain America, she locked eyes with Steve. If you survive this, we will have a reckoning about your influence on Imperial warriors. Looking forward to it, Steve replied without sarcasm. Corvin departed, and the tension on the bridge lessened immediately. Leonidas gestured for Steve to approach the command throne. Captain America, you proposed this strategy. Will you see it through? Where do you need me? Steve asked. Here, Leonidas replied. As tactical advisor, you've commanded successful actions against impossible odds. Your perspective may prove valuable as this battle develops. I'm not a naval strategist, Steve cautioned. I'm ground forces, infantry, urban combat, small unit tactics. And I've commanded void warfare for 3 centuries, Leonidas replied. But I've never commanded while trying to save civilians rather than destroy enemies. That's your expertise. So advise me, how do we fight a battle we're trying to lose slowly? Steve understood the reframing immediately. This wasn't about winning. It was about losing in a way that achieved their objective. He studied the tactical display with new eyes. You need to look dangerous without being destroyed instantly, he said. That means aggressive positioning but defensive tactics. Move close enough that they have to engage you seriously, but use your maneuverability to avoid their heaviest weapons. Make them chase you. Every minute they spend repositioning to get good firing solutions is a minute the transports are loading civilians. A fighting retreat in 3 dimensions, Dante said thoughtfully. Using the planet's gravity well to slingshot around, forcing the Chaos Fleet to adjust courses constantly. Exactly, Steve confirmed. They have more firepower, but capital ships aren't agile. Use your maneuverability advantage. Stay in their formation where their heavy weapons risk hitting their own ships. Make them spread out to avoid friendly fire, which weakens their concentration. This assumes they care about friendly fire, Leonidas noted. Chaos fleets often don't. Then we exploit that, Steve replied. If they're willing to shoot through their own ships, position yourself so their heaviest weapons are angled toward their own fleet. Make them choose between hitting you and hitting themselves. Tactical cowardice, a voice said from one of the crew pits, another space marine at a weapons control station. Captain, we should engage honorably, not hide behind enemy formations. Honor is for duel, Steve said, turning to face the marine. This is war, and war is about achieving objectives with minimal losses. Your objective is time. Everything else is secondary. You would have us fight without honor? The marine demanded. I'd have you fight intelligently, Steve replied. Honor matters when both sides follow the same rules. Your enemies worship beings that literally feed on suffering. They abandoned honor when they fell to chaos. You don't owe them anything except defeat. The marine looked to Leonidas for confirmation. The captain nodded slowly. Captain America is correct, Brother Mikhail. We fight to protect, not to prove our valor. Today, victory is measured in civilians evacuated, not enemies destroyed. The sanguine valor began moving, its massive bulk somehow graceful despite the physics-defying scale. Through the viewports, Steve watched Varda's prime surface recede as they maneuvered toward the approaching Chaos fleet. The enemy ships grew larger on the tactical display, and Steve felt the familiar pre-battle tension in his gut. "All weapons batteries report ready," a tech priest announced in binary cant that servitors translated. "Void shields at maximum. Boarding defenses active." "Good," Leonidas said, "because here they come." The Chaos fleet split its formation, 3 cruisers spreading to encircle the sanguine valor, while frigates moved to screening positions. It was textbook void warfare. Overwhelming force applied from multiple vectors to prevent escape. Except Steve wasn't trying to escape. "Hard starboard," he said, pointing at the tactical display. "Thrust toward the leftmost cruiser like you're going to ram it. They'll adjust course to avoid collision, which creates separation from the other 2 cruisers." "Do it," Leonidas ordered, and the battle barge responded with surprising speed for something so massive. The Chaos cruiser reacted exactly as Steve predicted, altering course to avoid the charging battle barge. For several crucial seconds, it was isolated from its support, unable to concentrate fire effectively. "All batteries, target that cruiser," Leonidas commanded. "Lance strikes to their void shield generators, macro cannons on their engine section." The sanguine valor unleashed its fury, and Steve watched in awe as weapons that could level cities fired in synchronized volleys. Lance beams, coherent energy powerful enough to pierce kilometers of adamantium, struck the Chaos cruiser's shields, overwhelming them through sheer concentrated power. Macro cannon shells the size of tanks followed, explosive rounds that found weakened sections and detonated deep within the enemy ship. The Chaos cruiser staggered, secondary explosions rippling across its hull, but it didn't die. Instead, something worse happened. The damaged sections began to heal, flesh growing over torn metal, demonic faces forming in the superstructure, laughing as they regenerated. "Emperor's blood," Dante breathed. "That ship's fully corrupted. It's not just a vessel anymore. It's alive." "Can you still kill it?" Steve asked. "Everything dies if you hit it hard enough," Leonidas replied grimly. "But it will take sustained fire, and the other cruisers are repositioning. We have perhaps 30 seconds before they achieve firing solutions." "Then move again," Steve urged. "Use the damaged cruiser as cover. Put it between you and the others." The sanguine valor dove, using thrusters that violated what Steve understood about momentum, and positioned itself directly behind the wounded Chaos cruiser. The other enemy ships hesitated, unwilling to fire through their damaged comrade despite their usual disregard for allies. "Boarding torpedoes incoming," a sensor operator shouted. "The Chaos cruisers are launching assault craft. They're trying to board us." "Of course they are," Dante said. "They want this ship intact if possible, corrupted into their fleet." "Captain Leonidas, I request permission to lead boarding defense teams." "Granted. Take Captain America with you. Let's see how he fights Chaos Marines in close quarters." Steve felt his shield's familiar weight on his arm. "Just point me at the enemy." "The enemy," Dante said as they ran toward the embarkation deck, "are traitor Astartes, space marines who fell to Chaos during the Horus Heresy 10,000 years ago. They've had millennia to perfect the art of slaughter, and they're enhanced beyond even our considerable capabilities. You're facing demigods, Captain. Are you prepared?" Steve thought about fighting the greater demon, about charging the cultist horde, about every impossible battle he'd faced since arriving in this nightmare galaxy. He thought about the PDF soldiers watching him, about civilians evacuating even now, about the choice between tactical retreat and heroic sacrifice. "I'm always prepared," he said. "That's my secret. I'm always ready to do what needs doing, no matter how impossible it seems." They reached the embarkation deck as the first boarding torpedo struck, a massive drill bit projectile that punched through the sanguine valor's armored hull and disgorged its cargo. Chaos Space Marines in power armor that pulsed with warp corruption, bearing weapons that screamed when they fired. Champions of dark gods come to claim an Imperial ship for their twisted fleets. Dante drew his power sword, a blade wreathed in energy fields that crackled with barely contained fury. For Sanguinius and the Emperor, the Blood Angels surged forward to meet the traitors, and Steve Rogers charged with them, shield raised, just another soldier in a war that had raged for 10,000 years, fighting because that's what heroes did. The battle for the Sanguine Valor had begun, and the outcome would determine whether 10,000 civilians lived or died. The Chaos Space Marines came through the breach like nightmares made flesh, and Steve's first thought was, these aren't just soldiers, they're walking apocalypses. Each traitor stood even taller than the Blood Angels, their power armor corrupted by millennia of warp exposure, living metal that breathed, bled, and screamed. They bore the marks of the Black Legion, midnight armor decorated with trophies of conquest, personal heraldry depicting atrocities, and eyes that glowed with madness, barely contained. The lead Chaos Marine carried a chain axe that was less weapon and more demon bound to a grip, its teeth spinning so fast they blurred into a crimson haze. "Blood Angels!" the traitor roared, voice amplified through corrupted Vox speakers. "Your Gene Father's blood runs in your veins, and we shall spill it for the glory of the War Master." "You serve a Baden," Dante said, his voice continued cold, enough to freeze helium. "You forfeited the right to speak our Primarch's name when you turned traitor. Now you die for your blasphemy." The Chaos Marine laughed. "We died 10,000 years ago, loyalist. Everything since has been borrowed time and stolen glory. But you," his eyes, too many eyes, focused on Steve, "you're something new, fresh meat for the grinder. What chapter spawned something so small and weak?" "Brooklyn," Steve replied, and he threw his shield. The vibranium disc carved through the air with physics-defying precision, striking the Chaos Marine's helmet with enough force to snap the head backwards. The traitor staggered, more from surprise than damage, and Steve was already moving, closing the distance while the enemy was off balance, using every technique he'd learned fighting enemies who outclassed him physically. His shield returned to his hand through trajectory calculation and perfect timing, and Steve ducked under a chain axe swing that would have bisected him. The weapon's teeth screamed past close enough to shave molecules off his skin, but close wasn't contact. Steve drove his shield's edge into the joint between the Chaos Marine's chest plate and arm, finding the weak point through observation and analysis. The traitor's arm didn't separate. The armor was too thick, the Marine's bones too reinforced, but the shield's impact created a hairline fracture in the joint seal. Pressurized air hissed out, and the Chaos Marine's arm lost some of its supernatural strength. "Clever," the traitor acknowledged, bringing his chain axe around for another strike. "But cleverness only delays the inevitable. You cannot hurt us. We are the chosen of chaos, immortal through..." Dante's power sword separated the Chaos Marine's head from his shoulders mid-sentence. The body collapsed, ancient ceramite clanging against decking, and black ichor that might have once been blood leaked from the neck stump. "They always talk too much," Dante said, already engaging the next traitor. "It's a corruption symptom. The warp makes them believe their own superiority, which creates tactical vulnerabilities." Steve filed that information away and charged the next Chaos Marine, who was wrestling with two Blood Angels simultaneously. The traitor had strength enough to lift both loyalists and was clearly winning the grapple, armor hissing with hydraulic power that exceeded the Blood Angel's own augmented capabilities. Steve hit the Chaos Marine's knee joint from behind with his shield, targeting the exact weak point he'd identified on the previous enemy. The joint buckled, not broken but compromised, and the traitor's balance shifted. The two Blood Angels he'd been lifting suddenly became leverage against him, their weight pulling him off-center. "Now!" Steve shouted, and the Blood Angels drove their combat knives into the eyepiece slits of the Chaos Marine's helmet, punching through corrupted ceramite to find the flesh beneath. The traitor screamed, not in pain but in frustrated fury, and died thrashing, his body refusing to accept death until enough critical damage accumulated that even chaos-enhanced physiology couldn't compensate. "You fight well for baseline human," one of the Blood Angels acknowledged, pulling his knife free and examining Steve's technique. "You target weak points instead of attempting to match strength. This is wisdom." It's how you fight bigger enemies, Steve replied, already scanning for the next threat. You don't fight what they're good at. You fight what they're weak at. More boarding torpedoes struck the Sanguine Valor, each one disgorging fresh horrors. Chaos Marines of different legions this time. Steve caught glimpses of tarnished gold armor marked with excessive ornamentation that had to be Emperor's children, brutish figures in white and blue that charged with chain axes, held in both hands that screamed World Eaters, and sorcerers in ornate armor glowing with eldritch power that could only be Thousand Suns. They're committing multiple legions, Dante said, tactical assessment overriding combat focus. This isn't a simple boarding action. This is a coordinated assault to capture the ship. Captain Leonidas needs to know. He touched his Vox bead, reported the enemy composition, and Steve heard Leonidas's response crackle back. Understood. All defense teams, priority 1, protect the gene seed chambers and ship's navigators. If the Chaos forces reach either location, the Sanguine Valor is lost regardless of combat outcomes. Where are those locations? Steve asked while simultaneously blocking a blow from a World Eater berserker and countering with a shield strike to the traitor's throat. Gene seed chambers are aft, deck 7, Dante replied, power sword carving through a Chaos Marine's armor in a spray of corrupted blood. Navigator Sanctum is forward, deck 3. They're on opposite sides of the ship. So they split our forces, Steve assessed. Classic divide and conquer. We need to choose which to defend. Both must be defended, Dante insisted. Gene seed contains the chapter's genetic legacy. Without it, we cannot create new Blood Angels. Navigators allow warp travel. Without them, we're trapped in real space. Either loss is catastrophic. Then we hold both, Steve said with the confidence of someone who'd made similar impossible promises before. You take half the defense force to the Gene Seed chambers. I'll take the other half to the Navigator Sanctum. You can't lead Blood Angels, Dante objected, even while cutting down 2 Emperor's children simultaneously. You're not chapter command, not even a Astartes. The brothers won't follow you. Want to bet? Steve turned to address the Blood Angels fighting throughout the embarkation deck. His voice, enhanced by super soldier serum vocal cords, carried across the combat chaos with authority that cut through bolter fire and screaming chain weapons. Blood Angels, I need volunteers to defend the Navigator Sanctum. I'm not your chapter brother. I'm not your commander, but I'm a soldier who's held impossible positions before. Who's with me? For a moment, nothing. Then one Blood Angel, his armor scored with battle damage, his helmet cracked to reveal a pale face beneath, stepped forward. I am Starbearer. You remind us what we fight for. I will follow. And I, another Blood Angel said, and I. Within seconds, 24 Blood Angels had volunteered, leaving their positions to form up around Steve. Not because of rank or authority, but because of something more fundamental. They believed he would accomplish what he promised. Dante's expression behind his helmet was unreadable, but his voice carried something that might have been approval. Very well, Captain America. Defend the Navigators. I will hold the Gene Seed chambers. Emperor, protect us both. Good luck, Steve said. Luck is what the weak call unexplained success, Dante replied. We are Blood Angels. We do not need luck. He led his half of the force deeper into the ship, and Steve turned to his volunteers. All right, Blood Angels. I don't know your formations or your tactics, but I know fighting, and I know holding positions. We get to the Navigator Sanctum, and we turn it into a fortress. Nothing gets past us. Clear? Clear. Starbearer, the cracked helmet Marine replied. I am Brother Gavriel. These are my squad brothers. We will follow your lead. They ran through corridors that were equal parts starship and Gothic cathedral, passing shrines to Sanguinius and the Emperor, murals depicting the Blood Angels' greatest victories, and everywhere, the architecture that reminded Steve of why this civilization was simultaneously horrifying and admirable. They built beauty into their instruments of war, treating violence as something sacred rather than merely necessary. The Navigator Sanctum was sealed behind blast doors 3 meters thick, but those doors were currently open. Someone had either failed to close them or deliberately left them accessible. Steve's danger sense screamed warning. Ambush, he said quietly. They're already here, waiting for us. "How do you know?" Brother Gabriel asked. "Because that's what I do," Steve replied. He edged toward the entrance, shield raised, and peered around the corner into the sanctum. It was a massive chamber dominated by something that looked like a meditation throne, surrounded by instruments Steve didn't recognize. Probably whatever technology navigators use to guide ships through the warp. And standing between Steve and that throne were 6 Chaos Space Marines. These ones different from the earlier boarders. They wore armor so dark it seemed to absorb light, covered in scripture that hurt to read, with horns emerging from helmets like infernal crowns. Their weapons were inscribed with blasphemies, and they radiated an aura of zealous corruption that made even Steve's enhanced constitution want to recoil. "Word-bearers," Brother Gabriel hissed. "The first legion to fall. Chaos worshippers who turned against the Emperor before the heresy even began. They're fanatics, completely devoted to the ruinous powers. Loyal dogs of a false god," the lead word-bearer said, his voice carrying the cadence of a preacher delivering sermon. "You worship a corpse and call it divinity. We worship true gods who grant real power. Witness." The word-bearer raised his weapon, a massive staff topped with a screaming face, and reality bent. The air within the navigator's sanctum shimmered, and Steve felt something trying to push into the materium, something vast and hungry and utterly wrong. "They're summoning a demon," Gabriel shouted. "We must stop the ritual." Steve didn't hesitate. He charged into the sanctum, shield raised, directly at the word-bearer conducting the ritual. The other Chaos Marines moved to intercept, but the Blood Angels were right behind Steve, their bolters firing explosive rounds that stitched lines of destruction across corrupted ceramite. The lead word-bearer completed his ritual chant, and the demon manifested. Not a greater demon like the one Steve had fought on Vardis, but still terrifying. It was vaguely reptilian, scaled in colors that shifted between purple and green, with too many limbs and a jaw that split in 4 directions when it roared. "Feed, my pet," the word-bearer commanded. "Feast upon the loyalists' souls. Let them—" Steve's shield hit him mid-sentence. A throw so precise it caught the word-bearer's staff mid-swing and tore it from his grasp. The demon, suddenly without its summoner's direct control, turned on the nearest target, which happened to be a different word-bearer. The traitor Marines scattered as their supposed ally attacked them, and Steve used the chaos to close distance. He caught his shield on its return arc and drove forward into the word-bearer ranks, targeting joints, weak points, anything that gave him leverage against enemies who could literally tear him apart with casual effort. A word-bearer's power maul came down toward his head with enough force to crater steel. Steve blocked with his shield, vibranium absorbing the kinetic energy completely, and countered with a shield bash to the traitor's elbow joint. The armor cracked, not much, just enough, and suddenly that arm was compromised. The Blood Angels surged into the sanctum, their combat doctrine designed for fighting Space Marines who'd been their brothers once. They knew the weak points, the failure patterns, the psychological vulnerabilities, and they fought with a fury that Steve recognized. This wasn't just battle, this was personal. These traitors had betrayed everything the Blood Angels held sacred, and payment was being extracted in blood. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. For every word-bearer the Blood Angels dropped, 2 more appeared from hidden positions. The boarding action was larger than initial assessment suggested. This wasn't a raid, this was an invasion. "Brother Gabriel!" Steve shouted while blocking a chain axe with his shield and kicking a word-bearer's knee joint. "The demon! Can you banish it?" "I lack the psychic capability," Gabriel replied, his power sword locked against a word-bearer's Crozius. "We need a librarian or a sanctioned psyker." The demon, having finished devouring the word-bearer it had attacked, turned its attention to the Blood Angels. Its multiple limbs moved with nauseating speed, claws that dripped acid cutting through power armor like tissue paper. Steve's mind raced through options. He couldn't hurt the demon effectively. His earlier success had been against lesser demons or caught them during vulnerable moments. This thing was fully manifested, fully enraged and looking for prey. The Blood Angels couldn't stop it without psychic support they didn't have, which meant Steve needed to change the tactical equation. "Gabriel," he called out. "The navigator, is there one in the sanctum?" "Behind the throne," Gabriel confirmed. But she's defenseless, a non-combatant. She's also a psyker, Steve said, making connections. Navigators have psychic powers. They use them to navigate the warp. Can she fight? I don't know. Navigators aren't trained for combat. Then we find out. Steve broke from combat, shield raised, and ran toward the throne where Gavriel indicated the navigator was hiding. He found her behind the elaborate seat, a woman whose forehead bore a third eye, currently squeezed shut and covered by a leather patch. She was terrified, clutching religious iconography like a shield against horrors. And when Steve appeared, she nearly screamed. "I need your help," Steve said quickly. "That demon out there is killing my team. You're a psyker. Can you fight it?" "I'm a navigator," she gasped. "I see the warp. I guide ships. I'm not a battle psyker." "But you have power," Steve pressed. "The same energy those traitors used to summon that demon? You have access to it, right? Can you use it?" Yes, but I'm not trained for..." A blood angel's scream cut through her protest, and she flinched at the sound of one of her protectors dying. Steve saw the moment her fear transformed into something harder, something he recognized from every soldier he'd ever served with. Determination born of refusing to be helpless while others died protecting you. "Tell me what to do," she said, her third eye beginning to open beneath the patch. "Open yourself to the warp," Steve said, not knowing if he was giving good advice or condemning her to demon possession, but out of options. "Use your power however you can. Disrupt that demon, weaken it, anything that gives the blood angels an opening." She tore off the leather patch, and her third eye opened fully, an iris that shifted colors beyond normal spectrum, that saw things existing in dimensions Steve couldn't perceive. Power radiated from her, raw and uncontrolled, and the demon felt it immediately. The creature roared and turned toward the throne, abandoning its assault on the blood angels to eliminate the greater threat. It charged, multiple limbs churning across the deck, and Steve stepped directly into its path. "Not happening," he said, and braced himself. The demon hit him like a freight train made of claws and hate. Steve's shield absorbed some of the impact, but the force still drove him backwards, boots carving trenches in the decking. The demon's acid dripped onto his uniform, burning through fabric and scoring his skin beneath, but Steve held his ground. "Now!" he roared at the navigator. "Whatever you've got!" she screamed, not in pain but in exertion, and her third eye blazed with light that hurt to perceive. The warp energy she channeled wasn't the refined, controlled power of trained battle psychers. It was raw, chaotic, the psychic equivalent of a fire hose at full pressure with no nozzle. And it struck the demon like the hand of an angry god. The creature shrieked as the navigator's uncontrolled power washed over it, disrupting the warp stuff that gave it physical form. It didn't banish the demon completely, but it weakened the manifestation enough that when the blood angel's bolters fired blessed ammunition directly into its suddenly vulnerable core, the rounds found purchase. The demon exploded in purple smoke and the smell of roses and burning hair, its physical form unable to sustain cohesion against both psychic assault and physical damage simultaneously. The word-bearers, seeing their summoned creature destroyed and their boarding action failing, began to retreat. But the blood angels, enraged by the deaths of their battle brothers and fueled by righteous fury, pursued with merciless efficiency. Brother Gavriel's power sword found the lead word-bearer's neck joint and separated head from body. Another blood angel tackled a retreating traitor and delivered point-blank bolter shots to the helmet until nothing remained but fragments. Within minutes, the navigator's sanctum was secured, corpses of Chaos Space Marines littering the deck, and the surviving blood angels stood bloodied but victorious. Steve collapsed against the throne, exhausted beyond anything he'd felt since waking from the ice. The navigator sat beside him, her third eye closed again, trembling from psychic exertion. "Thank you," she whispered. "You protected me." A baseline human protected a navigator against Chaos Space Marines. They'll write this in the chapter records. "Just doing my job," Steve replied, but he was smiling despite everything. Brother Gavriel approached, removed his cracked helmet, and offered Steve a formal salute. "Captain America, you have earned the respect of the Blood Angels this day. You fought alongside us as an equal, commanded us as a leader, and held the line when holding seemed impossible. If you were not already named Starbearer, we would give you a title of honor ourselves." "How's Dante?" Steve asked. "The gene seed chambers?" "Secure," Gabriel confirmed via Vox report. "Captain Dante held against twice our numbers. Heavy casualties, but the gene seed is safe." "And the evacuation?" Gabriel checked his chronometer. "Complete. The last transport just cleared the atmosphere. All 10,000 civilians are away." Steve let his head fall back against the throne, relief washing over him. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, fighting enemies who should have destroyed them, they'd held long enough. The people were safe. "Captain Leonidas is requesting all hands return to battle stations," Gabriel continued. "The Sanguine Valor is heavily damaged. Multiple hull breaches, void shields failing, primary weapons batteries offline. The Chaos Fleet is moving in for final engagement." "Can we win?" Steve asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "No," Gabriel said honestly, "but we can make them pay dearly for this ship. And perhaps, if the Emperor wills it, we can survive long enough to reach the warp translation point and escape." Steve struggled to his feet, every muscle screaming protest. He'd been fighting since arriving on Vardis Prime, and even enhanced physiology had limits. But the battle wasn't over, and soldiers didn't quit just because they were tired. "Then let's get back to the bridge," he said. "If the Sanguine Valor is going down, she's going down fighting." They ran through corridors lit by emergency lighting, past damage control teams sealing breaches and medically treating wounded, through a ship that was dying but refusing to die quietly. And when they reached the bridge, Steve found Captain Leonidas still in his command throne. Armor scorched and cracked, but his voice steady as he issued orders that might save his ship and crew. "Captain America," Leonidas acknowledged as Steve entered. "I'm told you held the Navigator Sanctum against word-bearers and a demon. Impressive work." "We held together," Steve corrected. "How bad is it?" "Very," Leonidas replied without sugarcoating. "But the transports are away. The civilians survived. That's what matters." He gestured to the tactical display, which showed the Sanguine Valor surrounded by Chaos vessels closing for the kill. "We have one option remaining: emergency warp translation. It's dangerous without proper preparation, but if we don't jump now, we don't jump at all." "Do it," Steve said. "Whatever it takes to save this ship and crew." "Agreed," Leonidas said, and he issued the command that would either save them or doom them to horrors beyond imagining. "Navigator, engage warp engines. All hands, brace for emergency translation. May the Emperor protect us." The Sanguine Valor plunged into the immaterium, reality tearing open to swallow the dying ship whole. And Steve Rogers felt the warp close around him like the jaws of something vast and hungry and infinitely patient. They'd won the battle. Whether they'd survived the warp was screaming. Steve had experienced a lot in his life. The Tesseract's energy, the quantum realm's impossible physics, even the Soul Stone's metaphysical weight when Thanos had wielded it. But nothing prepared him for the raw, unfiltered madness of traveling through the immaterium without proper shielding or preparation. The Sanguine Valor shuddered violently, reality bending around it in ways that made Steve's enhanced senses scream protests. Through the bridge's viewports, which should have shown the safety of the Gellerfield's protective bubble, he could see things that shouldn't exist. Faces pressed against invisible barriers, reaching with too many hands, mouths opening to reveal mouths opening to reveal mouths in recursive impossibility. Gellerfield integrity at 47% and falling, a tech priest reported in panicked binary cant. Hull breaches from the boarding action are allowing warp energy to seep into ship sections. Recommend immediate. The tech priest's words cut off as something manifested behind him. A lesser demon that had slipped through one of the many gaps in the ship's defenses. It lunged for the tech priest's exposed cables and augmetics, seeking to corrupt the sacred technology, but Steve was already moving. His shield caught the demon mid-leap, vibranium disrupting whatever warp stuff allowed it to maintain cohesion. The creature shrieked and dissolved, but Steve knew it was only the beginning. The Sanguine Valor was wounded, bleeding, and in the warp, wounded things attracted predators. "All sections report demon manifestations," Captain Leonidas said, his voice strained but controlled. "Minor incursions across decks 3 through 9. Crew and chapter serfs are holding, but losses are mounting." "How long until we can translate back to real space?" Steve asked, helping the tech priest to his feet and positioning himself defensively between the bridge's entrance and the command stations. "Unknown," Leonidas replied. "The navigator is navigating blind. We had no time to plot a proper course. She's following the Astronomican's light, but through the warp's storms, that light is inconsistent. Could be minutes, could be hours. Or days," Brother Gavriel added grimly, having accompanied Steve back to the bridge. "Warp time doesn't correlate to real space consistently. Ships have been lost for centuries in the immaterium, only to emerge seconds after they entered, or vice versa." A massive impact shook the entire vessel, and Steve grabbed a support railing to avoid being thrown across the bridge. "What was that?" "Something large struck our hull," a sensor operator reported, "but sensors show nothing physical. It was a warp entity, something so vast it registers as mass rather than energy. It's following us." Steve moved to the tactical display, which now showed the Sanguine Valor as a tiny icon swimming through a representation of the warp that looked like someone had tried to map insanity itself. And behind them, growing closer, was a presence so massive it dwarfed even the ship. "What is that?" he demanded. "A warp predator," Dante said, having arrived on the bridge with his surviving warriors. His armor was scored and damaged, blood, both his own and others, covering the ornate ceramite. The immaterium contains things that feed on ships traveling through it. Most are drawn to psychic presence or demonic activity. This one, he studied the display with centuries of experience. This one is attracted to something else, something unusual. His eyes, ancient and knowing, focused on Steve. "You! It's attracted to you." "Me?" Steve said. "Why me?" "Because you're unique," Dante replied. "An uncorrupted soul from another reality entirely, shining in the warp like a beacon. To demons and warp entities, you're exotic, fascinating, something they've never encountered before. The creature pursuing us wants to taste what you are." "Then let's not give it the chance," Leonidas said. "Navigator, maximum speed, all remaining power to warp engines. We lose that thing or we die trying." The Sanguine Valor surged forward through impossible dimensions, and Steve felt the acceleration despite the ship's inertial dampeners. But the pursuing entity matched their speed, growing closer, and Steve could feel its attention like physical weight pressing against his mind. "It's gaining," the sensor operator reported unnecessarily. Everyone on the bridge could feel it now, a presence that was simultaneously vast and intimate, like being watched by something that existed on scales human minds couldn't process. "Captain Leonidas?" Inquisitor Corvin's voice crackled over Vox from the evacuation transport she'd been assigned to. "I'm receiving reports that the Sanguine Valor is being pursued through the warp. What is your status?" "Critical," Leonidas replied. "We're being hunted by something that defies classification. If you have suggestions, Inquisitor, now would be the time." There was silence then. "Captain America is aboard, correct?" "Yes." "The entity is attracted to him. His presence in the warp is anomalous. You must jettison him." The bridge fell silent except for the constant alarms and damage reports. Steve felt every eye turned toward him, and he understood immediately what Corvin was suggesting. Sacrifice one man to save the ship. It was tactically sound. It was logically correct. It was exactly the kind of necessary evil the Imperium specialized in. "No," Leonidas said simply. "Captain, this is not a request." "I said no, Inquisitor." Leonidas's voice carried absolute authority. Captain America held the line when holding seemed impossible. He inspired my warriors to heroism beyond their conditioning. He saved 10,000 civilians and protected this ship's gene seed and navigator. I will not repay that by casting him into the warp to be devoured. There will be another way." "There is no other way." Corvin's voice rose with genuine fear. Apparently, even Inquisitors could be frightened. "That creature will catch the Sanguine Valor, tear through your remaining shields, and kill everyone aboard. One life for hundreds. The mathematics are clear." "The mathematics," Steve said quietly, "don't account for human decency. But Captain, if sacrificing me gives this ship a better chance. It doesn't, Dante interrupted, studying the tactical display with focus that suggested he was calculating something. Jettisoning you might slow the creature marginally, but it wouldn't stop pursuing the ship. It's tasted your presence already. It won't be satisfied with just you. It will want the entire vessel that carried something so unique. We need a different solution. What if we give it something else to chase? And Steve suggested, his tactical mind working through options. A decoy, something that mimics whatever signature I'm giving off in the warp. We lack the technology to replicate your soul's resonance, the tech priest said. Your presence in the warp is unique. It registers as neither human, nor demon, nor Xenos. Nothing we have could mimic that. Steve's hand fell to his shield, feeling the vibranium's familiar weight, and an idea formed. Crazy, desperate, probably suicidal, but possibly effective. What about my shield, he said. It's from another universe too. Different physics, different materials, different everything. In the warp, would it register as unusual? Dante's eyes widened fractionally. Possibly. Vibranium absorbed the greater demon's attacks on Vardis. It disrupts warp energy. In the immaterium, that property might make it shine like a beacon. Then we jettison the shield, Steve said, and the words hurt more than any wound he'd taken. Not me, just the shield. Let the creature chase that while we escape. Captain America, Leonidas said carefully, that shield has saved your life repeatedly. It's your primary weapon and defense. Without it, you're significantly more vulnerable. I'm also significantly less likely to attract warp predators, Steve replied, and a vulnerable me is better than a dead ship. Do it. The nearest airlock is 3 decks down, Gabriel said. We'll need to physically launch it, give it velocity away from the ship to draw the creature's attention. Then let's move, Steve said, already heading for the bridge exit. They ran through corridors that were being torn apart by the warp's incursion, past crew members fighting desperate holding actions against demon manifestations, through sections where reality itself had become negotiable. Steve clutched his shield tightly, knowing these were the last moments he'd hold it, and memories flooded back unbidden. Every battle it had saved him in. Every time he'd thrown it, knowing it would return. Every moment it had been not just a weapon, but a symbol of everything Captain America represented. Defense of the innocent, stand against tyranny, refusal to surrender. And now he was about to throw it away into hell itself. They reached the airlock, and Gabriel began the mechanical override sequence to open it without proper cycling. This will breach the deck, he warned. We'll have approximately 30 seconds before emergency bulkhead seal. You'll have one throw. One throw is all I need, Steve said, positioning himself at the airlock door. The door opened, and Steve felt the warp's pull immediately. It wasn't vacuum, because the warp didn't obey those rules. It was something else, something that wanted to drag him out into impossible dimensions. He braced against the pull, shield raised for the last time. Captain America, Dante said formally, your sacrifice will be remembered. The Blood Angels do not forget those who stand beside us. It's just a shield, Steve replied, though his voice caught slightly. I'll make do with another one. He looked down at the vibranium disc, at the star that had represented hope for so long, and said quietly, thanks for everything, old friend. One last mission. And then he threw it. The shield left his hand with perfect form, spinning through the warp's impossible space, and immediately the pursuing entity's attention shifted. Steve felt the weight of its focus lift from him and lock onto the shield, which blazed in the warp like a star made of different physics. The creature roared, a sound that existed in dimensions hearing shouldn't access, and changed course, pursuing the vibranium with single-minded intensity. The emergency bulkhead slammed shut, cutting off the airlock, and Steve fell to his knees with exhaustion and loss. His shield was gone, claimed by the warp, and he felt naked without it. It worked, Gabriel reported, checking sensors. The entity is pursuing the shield away from our course. The navigator reports clear path to translation point. We can return to real space. Do it, Leonidas ordered over Vox. All hands prepare for warp exit, and someone get Captain America to the bridge. He's earned the right to see our survival. They made their way back, Steve feeling the absence of his shield's weight with every step, and arrived on the bridge just as the navigator completed the translation ritual. Reality tore open, and the Sanguine Valor fell out of the warp into normal space like a drowning man breaching the surface. The viewport showed stars, real stars, actual physical objects that obeyed sensible laws of physics. And Steve had never been so relieved to see empty space in his life. Translation successful, the navigator announced, her voice exhausted but triumphant. We've emerged in the Ultima Segmentum, approximately 3 systems from our intended destination. All Geller field breaches sealing. Demon manifestations fading as they lose connection to the warp. Damage report, Leonidas demanded. The reports came in, and they painted a grim picture. 40% of the crew dead or critically wounded. Main weapon systems offline, engines operating at 30% capacity, and structural damage that would require months in a proper shipyard to repair fully. But they were alive, they'd saved the civilians, and they'd denied chaos a significant victory. Captain America, Leonidas said, gesturing for Steve to approach the command throne. You sacrificed your primary weapon to save this ship. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've witnessed in 3 centuries, possibly both. It needed to be done, Steve said simply. You would have done the same. Perhaps, Leonidas acknowledged, but I am conditioned for such sacrifices. You chose it freely, knowing the cost. That distinction matters. He stood from his throne, towering over Steve, and offered something Steve hadn't expected, a formal salute. On behalf of the Sanguine Valor and all Blood Angels aboard, I thank you. You are no Astartes, but you have earned the chapter's respect. Around the bridge, every Blood Angel present, Dante, Gavriel, and dozens of others, raised their fists to their chest plates in salute. It was a gesture of profound honor, and Steve felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders like a mantle. What will you do now? Dante asked. You're trapped in our universe, without your primary weapon, on a damaged ship in hostile space. You could request transport to a civilized world. Try to build a life within the Imperium. Or, Steve prompted, sensing there was more. Or you stay with us, Dante replied. The Blood Angels could use someone with your tactical mind and moral compass. We face battles across the galaxy, protecting Imperial worlds from threats beyond counting. You've proven yourself in combat and in character. If you wished, we could petition for you to become an honorary chapter serf, or even pursue enhancement to Astartes if you... I'm not becoming a space marine, Steve interrupted gently. I've seen what that process does. But staying with the Blood Angels, helping where I can, fighting the good fight? He thought about the PDF soldiers on Vardis, about the civilians they'd saved, about the demon he'd faced, and the choice Leonidas had made to value people over doctrine. Yeah, I could do that, at least until I find a way home. Then welcome to the Blood Angels, Captain America, Leonidas said. Though we'll need to find you a proper weapon to replace your shield. I'm told the chapter armory contains power weapons dating back to the Great Crusade. Perhaps something there will suit you. Or, Brother Gavriel suggested, we could commission the forges of Baal to create something unique, a weapon worthy of the Starbearer who taught the Blood Angels to remember why we fight. Steve smiled, genuinely smiled, despite the exhaustion and loss and impossible circumstances. He'd lost his shield. He was trapped in a nightmare universe. And he'd probably die fighting horrors he couldn't comprehend. But he'd found something he'd worried he might never find again after losing the Avengers. Purpose, brotherhood, a cause worth fighting for. Let's start with the armory, he said. Then you can tell me about these other battles you mentioned. Because if there are people who need protecting and enemies who need stopping, that's where Captain America belongs, shield or no shield. The Sanguine Valor limped toward the nearest Imperial shipyard, its crew battered but unbroken, carrying a legend that would spread across the Imperium. The story of a stranger from another world who'd reminded the Blood Angels of their humanity, who'd saved 10,000 souls against impossible odds, and who'd sacrificed his most treasured possession to save warriors he barely knew. On Vardis Prime, Colonel Vestra and the PDF would rebuild, telling stories of the Starbearer who taught them hope was a weapon too. The civilians would remember the man in blue who'd stood between them and damnation. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Administratum, Reports would filter upward about the anomaly called Captain America, the question of what to do with him and whether such dangerous idealism could be tolerated in the Imperium's rigid structure. But those were problems for tomorrow. Tonight, Steve Rogers stood on the bridge of a Gothic cathedral disguised as a warship, surrounded by warriors who'd accepted him as one of their own, and felt something he hadn't felt since waking from the ice. He felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Planetary was still being decided. 3 weeks later, the Sanguine Valor docked at Forge World Metallica for extensive repairs. Steve stood in the chapter armory, examining weapons that had been wielded by heroes whose names were legend, each one a masterwork of form and function that represented centuries of warfare. But none of them felt right. None of them had the balance, the weight, the rightness of his shield. "Still searching?" Dante asked, entering the armory with his usual silent grace despite the power armor. "Still searching," Steve confirmed. "Your tech priests offered to forge something custom, but I told them I'd know it when I saw it. Haven't seen it yet." "Perhaps," Dante said thoughtfully, "because you're looking for a replacement instead of something new. Your shield was part of your identity, the symbol made manifest. What you need now is a symbol that represents who you've become, not who you were." Steve considered this. He'd been Captain America for so long that separating the man from the shield seemed impossible. But Dante was right. He wasn't the same person who'd been pulled into this universe. He'd seen things that changed him, fought battles that tested principles he thought were absolute, and learned that sometimes the only choices available were between terrible options and worse ones. "What would you suggest?" he asked. Dante gestured to a weapon mounted on the far wall, almost hidden among the more elaborate pieces. It was a power sword, not ornate like Dante's own blade, but simple, functional, with a cross guard that formed a subtle star pattern. The weapon had been forged during the Great Crusade, Dante explained, and had belonged to a blood angel who believed that protection was as important as punishment. "Brother Cassius the Defender," Dante said. "He stood at gates, held walls, protected evacuations. He never sought glory or personal combat. He simply stood where he was needed most and refused to yield. The chapter remembers him not for kills achieved, but for lives saved. His blade passed into the armory when he fell defending a cathedral full of civilians from a demonic incursion. He held the door alone for 6 hours while evacuations completed. When reinforcements arrived, they found him dead, surrounded by demon corpses, his hand still gripping his sword even after his heart had stopped. Steve reached out and lifted the blade from its mounting. It was lighter than he expected, balanced perfectly, and when he activated its power field, the energy that wreathed the blade was the same blue as his old uniform. It felt right. "I'll take it," he said, "if the chapter permits." "The chapter insists," Dante replied. "Brother Cassius would approve. Another defender, another warrior who measures victory in lives saved rather than enemies slain. It's fitting that his blade continues his work." As they left the armory, Steve carrying his new weapon, they passed a viewing port that showed Metallica's forges burning in the distance. And Steve thought about everything he'd lost: his world, his time, his team, his shield, and everything he'd gained. Purpose in a universe that desperately needed people willing to stand against darkness. He'd been Captain America, the Star Bearer, the defender of the innocent. He was all those things and none of them, shaped by worlds but defined by choice. And as long as there were people who needed defending, as long as tyranny and corruption threatened the innocent, he would stand and fight, because that's what heroes did. Across universes, across circumstances, across impossible odds. They stood up, they held the line, they refused to surrender. And if Steve Rogers had learned anything from his time in the grim darkness of the far future, it was that even in a galaxy where there was only war, there was still room for hope. You just had to be willing to fight for it with everything you had. The Sanguine Valor would return to combat readiness. The Blood Angels would deploy to new war zones, and Captain America would stand beside them, sword in hand, teaching the Imperium's Angels of Death that sometimes the most important battles weren't about killing enemies. They were about saving friends,